The anime starts by introducing us to a 35-year-old, uneducated, broke, romantically inept white-collar worker named Kenichi Yamada, who spends his life enjoying hardcore games. After the end of a game that took him 3 years to finish, Kenichi only complains about what a weak sauce game it was, because he wants a game that takes him at least 10 years to beat. Without wasting any time, he searches online for a hardcore video game with garbage balancing. His browser suddenly glitches, displaying a startup menu from an unknown company that offers him a game that never ends in a fantasy world of swords and magic. Kenichi doesn't even question how weird that was, and simply takes a look at the difficulty settings. To his surprise, there's a new difficulty called Hell Mode, and with it comes a warning that lets him know that regret will be the least of his worries, because he'll be faced with utter despair. In Hell Mode, leveling up requires 100 times more experience than normal mode, but of course, that's exactly what he's looking for, so he chooses that option without a doubt. Once that's done, he sees all the character classes to choose from and settles for Summoner, because it has the highest difficulty rating. That character class defaults him to the Surf Social class, and it's still in alpha testing, so he doesn't even know how he's able to select it. Either way, it seems like a fun challenge to him, so he clicks on Start and suddenly disappears from his room, leaving his world behind to reincarnate into a new one as a serf named Alan. His parents, Teresia and Roden, are serfs who live in a nameless frontier village where pioneers pay tax to a ruling lord to cultivate the land. Every time he's left alone to sleep, Alan tries to figure out how the system of this game works because he's supposed to be a summoner now, and he wishes he could do something with it. After countless attempts, he finally manages to summon a grimoire that displays his stats and the details on his summoning skill. Apparently, Summon and Create have their own skill experience points, which means they level up the more he uses them. Alan notices that he already has summons available for creation, though it's limited to insects and beasts for now. The book suddenly shows him a message from Elmia, the god of creation, who thanks him for his patronage and apologizes for the delay in delivering his grimoire. Alan assumes that it's some kind of letter from the administrator, since they probably still have some hiccups to work out for the summoner class. That aside, a few days later, after figuring out how his skill works, Alan finally summons his first insect, a rank H grasshopper he decides to name Denka. Even though the insect doesn't listen to him, he finds out that it has buffs, which actually boosts his own stats. After several days of toying around with his skills, Alan eventually moves on to creating beasts, so now he has a mouse named Mousy. Alan can stock up to 10 summon cards for each creature, and the most important thing is their buffs. For example, by stocking 10 of Mousy's cards, his attack stat goes up by 10, which means he packs enough punch to easily surpass what any regular baby can do. After coming back from a hunt, Alan's father decides to show him the giant boar they hunted. As they walk there, they see a flock of birds flying north in the sky, and Roden explains that they're a monster called Albaheron. He also confesses to Alan that he named him after the Albaheron, because they can use their wings to fly whenever they want in the world, and that's true freedom to him. After a long walk, Alan finally sees what a great boar looks like, and his neighbor, Gerda, tells him that it's a C-rank monster, so they need at least 20 guys just to take one down. Alan keeps that in mind, and after 10 months, he finally reaches Summon Level 2 and Create Level 2, obtaining a lot of new benefits and skills. Despite how excited he feels, even with his max MP, he can't fuse or create anything new. When he turns 3, he's able to use the skill to create new summons, including a bird he decides to name Chappie. He also has a frog named Hopper and a mole named Molly, rank G summons that have really useful abilities and buffs. Even though he wants to focus on his summons, he sometimes has to deal with Gerda's daughter, Krina, who always wants to challenge him to a duel. Alan can't keep up with her, even with all his buffs, because she's just too overpowered and has no mercy when fighting him. Later during dinner, Alan finds out that when he turns 5, there's a divine ceremony to determine what kind of talent he has. With any luck, a good talent will help him break out of serfdom, so his parents are looking forward to it. When winter arrives, Teresia gives birth to Alan's brother, Mash, with the help of Krina's mother, Matilda. Alan can't help but wonder why he reincarnated, and although he knows that all he wants is to max up his levels, this family stuff is pretty nice too. He's not exactly sure how he'll pull it off, but he wants to free all of his family from the drudgery of serfdom. Once Alan finally turns 5 years old, it's time for the appraisal ceremony for him and Krina. Not everyone gets to have a talent, so it's something really important, especially when they know that this country has seen heroes whose lineage can even be traced back to serfdom. After almost all children in the ceremony get appraised, only Alan and Krina are left. To everyone's surprise, Krina has the talent of a sword lord, one of the best there is. That talent is even considered a miracle, but Alan is not surprised, because it's the only way to justify how ridiculously overpowered she is. Now that it's his turn, Alan is just relieved that his parents will know that he's a summoner. However, due to a glitch in the game, the priest informs them that Alan has no talent. Having no other choice, Alan decides to drown the developers with complaint letters about that glitch, because now nobody will know that he's a summoner. A few days later, someone informs Gerda that the Order of Knights is coming to see Krina, so they head to the commoner village to meet the captain, Xenoph. Without beating around the bush, Xenoph informs Gerda that they have to hold a fencing duel with his daughter to prove her talent. Of course, Gerda is against this, because Krina has never even held a real sword once before. However, Xenoph warns him that falsifying the results of the appraisal ceremony is punishable by death, so they must determine whether Krina's talent as Sword Lord is legitimate. Despite all the tension, Krina gets really excited the moment she sees a real sword for the first time, and she doesn't hesitate to accept the challenge. As if it were a game, Krina fights the vice captain of the Knights, Librand, who doesn't hold back even though she's a 5-year-old girl. Gerda, Rodin, and even Alan lose their tempers when they see Librand kick Krina in the ribs, making her body crash into the nearest wall. However, to everyone's surprise, that's the moment Krina activates her extra skill for the first time, which allows her to stand up like nothing happened. Even the vice captain of the Knights feels threatened by that, so he quickly tries to block her relentless attacks, but Krina is a lot faster and stronger than before, to the point where she even manages to break his sword in two. Gerda is clearly happy for his daughter, but he's still mad at the Knights for putting her through this. Xenoph recognizes Krina as a genuine sword lord, so he apologizes to Gerda and invites him to the chieftain's residence to discuss her future. There, he informs the chieftain, Deboji, that the nameless frontier village is going to be named after Krina to honor this momentous occasion. Xenoph then tells Gerda that when Krina reaches the age of 12, she can go study at the academy and eventually serve directly under the royal family. Sometime after the news broke, Alan's summon skill finally reaches level 3, obtaining the enhanced skill and expanding his card inventory, which will give him more buffs. He later learns during dinner that there's something in this world called the Trial of the Gods. His father explains that it's a special moment that happens occasionally when they hunt, which makes them feel a sudden burst of energy that gets rid of all their wounds and exhaustion. Alan assumes that that must be how they describe leveling up in this world, and he knows that Rodin's a battle-hardened veteran at boar hunting, so he must be a pretty high level by now. Even though his summon skill went up, he's still just level 1, and he's never going to gain any experience unless he beats some monsters. However, serfs can't leave the village without permission, and the only exception is for hunting. Since his father is completely against him going hunting, Alan just decides to get even stronger, and continues experimenting with his new skill. After a successful fusion of 2 of his summon cards, he gets a Grass F summonable creature type with an MP buff, which he decides to name Apo. Alan tests a few things with this summon, and learns that Apo's skill, Aroma, can shorten MP recovery time from 6 hours to 5 hours, which enables him to do even more daily activities. One night, Gerda and the other hunters bring Rodin's injured body back home, saying that he took a boar fang right to the gut. Alan notices that it looks like they straight up cauterized the wound, and Gerda explains that they only managed to keep him alive thanks to a healing herb, a Muller's flower. That herb is something so valuable, they only were able to obtain it thanks to some gold coins the Knight Captain gave him as an apology for what happened with Krina. Gerda later explains to Alan that all of this happened because of a commoner, since they started joining their hunts after hearing Xenoph talking about Rodin as a legend for taking the most dangerous role. None of them were comfortable with amateurs tagging along on the hunt, but they're not in a position to refuse orders from the chieftain. During today's hunt, one of the commoners tripped and fell, so Rodin stepped in to save him from the boar, but his stomach got pierced in the process. Now it'll take a while for Rodin to recover, and Alan can just wonder what he's been doing with himself. He's been totally preoccupied with powering himself up, but there isn't any good in power without purpose. That's why, while his father recovers, he decides to drop the act and pours every buff into his physical stats to help his family, carrying heavy stuff around and helping with farm work. Deboji shows up in their house at some point with the commoner, who really regrets what happened and apologizes to Rodin. Alan continues focusing on getting stronger for his family, so he creates a vast area outside to experiment, using a strategy to attract and take down monsters. However, to his surprise, the monster he attracts is none other than a D-rank Albahiran, and it ends up being the first monster he defeats in this world. It wasn't an easy task though, and he had to create a whole new strategy mid-battle to defeat it. He later finds out that Albahirans fetch quite some money, but Gerda tells him that they still have to fork over most of it to the upper class, because the 60% tax even applies to wild monsters. However, a kid like him wouldn't be out there catching monsters if his dad hadn't gotten hurt so bad, so they use that as leverage to negotiate a bigger cut with the chieftain. After getting the deal they wanted, Alan returns to the village and sets up the same trap from before, using Hopper as a decoy to attract more Albahirans. He ends up defeating 2 Albahirans this time, and all the experience points help him reach level 2 after 6 years of being reincarnated. With that, Alan decides to be honest with his parents, and confesses that he heard an oracle from God back when he was 1 year old. The god Elmia told him that he would bless him with power and wisdom, which basically means he's smarter and physically stronger than the average person. But at the same time, Elmia also told him that he'd be faced with trials beyond what even 100 men could accomplish, and he'd have to use his blessings of power and wisdom to overcome them. Both Rodin and Teresia are shocked to hear that, since it sounds like something extremely hard for a kid like Alan, and it means he actually has a talent. Alan can't say anything about being a summoner yet though, because some people might get the wrong idea if they find out he can summon and control creatures. When winter comes, Alan works in drying the Albahiran meat, and Gerda now also knows the truth, though he always figured he was no ordinary kid. After drying the meat, they go to the commoner village to trade it for supplies, and Alan decides to ask about the difference between serfs and commoners. Gerda tells him it's their taxes, since the 60% rule doesn't apply to commoners, commoners, and they have what's called a head tax instead, where they pay 3 gold coins for each adult and 1 for each kid every year. Gerda then mentions that serfs have to make a tribute of 10 gold coins per person in the family for them to become commoners. He's also heard stories that the Baron can reward people with commoner status, but he doesn't know if that's true or not. Alan thinks about that for a moment, knowing that his family is about to get a new member, so it would cost them 50 gold coins to become commoners. Sometime around winter, Teresia gave birth to her 3rd child, Mayula, so Alan decides to spend some time with his mother that night to see his new little sister. Roden and Gerda get home later than usual that night, and they arrive with bad news. Turns out they were summoned by the chieftain, who told them that he wants them to raise the number of boars that they deliver to the Baron from 10 to 15. To make that happen, he expects them to let the commoners join the hunt again this year. Roden and Gerda wanted to say no, of course, but this order came directly from the Baron, apparently. Gerda mentions that they want them to hunt 20 boars next year, and the only way to make it happen is for them to hunt more often than the usual, once every 10 days. That also means greater risks for everyone involved, but the opinions of a few serfs can't compete with the orders of the Baron. Alan clarifies that if they increase the number of hunts, then they'll just keep expecting more from them over the years until it soon becomes impossible. The ultimate result is still recruiting more serfs, which is not beneficial for them, so they should do what the chieftain says and let commoners join the hunt again. Gerda is clearly against this, but Alan decides to handle things, asking them to trust him, since he has wisdom that was blessed to him by Elmia. Roden ends up giving him an opportunity, so on the next hunt, all serfs and commoners adopt Alan's hunting strategy. Once they get to the hunting zone, Alan lets the serfs handle the boars as they usually do, giving the commoners the easiest task. It was a mistake to count on weaklings like them to tank anything in the first place, so his strategy is to leave them at the end to finish off the boar. After all, they only need to attack it once to gain experience from the battle, and that will make them stronger. Everything goes as planned, so on later hunts, even more commoners join them, easily leveling up thanks to Alan's strategy, which allows them to hunt more boars. Alan wishes he knew why the Baron was so hung up on having more boars though, since he doesn't get the impression his territory is suffering from food shortages. That aside, even though he can't participate in the hunts himself, he managed to find a way to gain experience points in each hunt, so in only 3 months, he reaches level 6. By June, Alan's summon level finally goes up again, and the grimoire lets him know that he has unlocked E-rank summon creatures, and even a new type. His card inventory went up by 10 as well, and the amount of buffs that summon creatures provide scale by their level, so he should get a significant boost if he fills his inventory with 40 E-rank cards. He also gets a new skill called Storage, which allows him to store anything in his grimoire as long as it fits, with no limits on the amount. Alan decides to experiment with his new type of summon creature, but to his surprise, creating E-ranks requires E-rank magic stones now. Fortunately, he kept some magic stones from the horned rabbits that wandered into the village, so he uses some to create his new summons. Thanks to this, he creates an insect E-butterfly he names Papillon, and a rank E-beast, a saber-toothed tiger he names Tama. Alan soon realizes he's going to need a lot of E-rank magic stones, but since they're mostly considered trash, he can find them on the ground around the village. He manages to gather a bunch of magic stones thanks to the help from some villagers, which allows him to create new E-rank summons. Alan now has a summon creature named Hawkins, a hawk with keen vision that alerts him to danger. He also has Beansy, who has the ability to heal his wounds, and Wally, a sturdy wall that serves as a shield. He decides to experiment with his new summons by fighting a great boar, and he ends up convinced that each summon type is designed to fulfill a specific role in battle. Insect types are for applying debuffs, beast types are for offense, birds are for gathering and relaying intel, grass types are for healing, and stone types are for defense. Now he understands what the developers were going for, and he has an unrivaled army of creatures at his disposal that can overcome any situation and rout any enemy. Time after that, the chieftain informs Gerda and Rodin that the Baron himself will be paying them a visit next month because he has expressed interest in observing their boar hunts firsthand. Deboji explains that they need someone to serve as a tour guide for the Baron during his stay, so he's hoping Alan can help them show the Baron hospitality, starting with dinner the night before the hunt. Alan just thinks that he couldn't care less about the Baron, but he knows that he won't get any chances to leave the village as a serf, and it will take 10 years of hunting boars and albaherons before he can reach commoner status. Since the Baron can gift people with commoner status, Alan decides to accept being his tour guide during the boar hunt. A month later, Baron Granvelle finally arrives with his daughter, Cecil, and his butler, Sebas. They all head to the chieftain's residence for dinner, where Alan introduces himself and shows them hospitality, managing to impress the Baron with his manners. The next day, Alan guides them to the hunting grounds, where they're able to observe the whole area from a watchtower they built just for them. When the hunters finally arrive, Zenoff notices that they've got armor now, so Alan explains that it was forged from leftover pelts, bones, and fangs from the boars they hunted last year. After a while, the bait team manages to lure in a great boar from the forest, so Granville observes firsthand how they take it down thanks to Alan's strategy. Zenoff admits that these men may not be knights, but he believes that they are worthy of being called warriors. Granville agrees, and admits that he must applaud their fighting prowess, so it seems there will be no problem with reaching the boar quota. As soon as he says that, 2 great boars suddenly appear, so Zenoff gets concerned and asks Libran to make ready to assist. However, the hunting team manages to take down both boars without any help from the knights. The Baron is clearly impressed by this, and now Xenoph is sure that his knights won't be needed, after all. Alan takes the opportunity to tell Granvelle that they actually have 2 requests, which is to make 2 more shield walls for the hunts, and to give them his permission to trade in liquor and allow its distribution among the serfs. Xenoph quickly understands that they need the liquor to help keep their morale high during the hunts, so he tells the Baron that he thinks that their request stands to very good reason. Granvelle decides to consider it favorably, and he tells Alan that he has done a splendid job today. After the hunt, Alan meets the Baron in the chieftain's residence again, this time with Rodin and Gerda by his side. Granvelle tells them that they've truly shown him what they're capable of, so he must commend their amazing hunting skills. That takes both Rodin and Gerda by surprise, but this is exactly what Alan was waiting for. Just as he wanted, Granvelle elevates them and their families to commoner status, and mentions that he will also grant the same status to any serfs who have taken part in the hunts for over 10 years. After their initial surprise, Rodin, Gerda, and Alan thank him for his decision, though Alan is the happiest out of them because that means he can go hunting outside the village limits. He has dreamed about this moment countless times over the past 8 years, and his first stop will be the White Dragon Mountains because he wants to go dragon hunting. Despite his excitement, Alan's plans get ruined after the Baron hears the story of Krina village and how it was created. He learns the important role Rodin had from the very beginning and the way he lost a friend in the process. After dredging up such a painful memory, Granvelle tells Rodin that he wants to honor the bravery of his youth with one more reward, so he'll allow him to ask of him whatever he wants. To Alan's bad luck, Rodin thinks about him first and asks the Baron to allow his son to work at his estate. Alan internally panics because he'll have even less freedom living with the Baron, so he must find a way out of this situation. Unfortunately, Granvelle is more than willing to let him work for him, and he even mentions that a hallboy won't do, so he decides to hereby appoint Alan as manservant of the Granvelle family. Rodin looks extremely happy, to the point of crying, so Alan has no choice but to accept his new position. Before leaving the village, Alan has one last duel with Krina, and for the first time, he manages to tie, so he tells her that they'll settle this in the future when they meet again. Alan then says goodbye to everyone, including the chieftain's son, Palomas, and the kid he met at the appraisal ceremony, Dagora, who reluctantly gives him a dagger as a farewell gift. With that, Alan finally says goodbye to his parents and goes with the Baron, officially leaving his home village behind. After a while living in the Granvelle estate, Alan starts getting used to his new life, dealing with Cecil's requests all the time. Despite all the hard times Cecil gives him, Alan soon finds out that there are ranks in the Granvelle estate, and he's part of the lower ones, which are considered part of the family. Alan is surprised to know that servants are members of the family itself, and he now understands why his father was crying tears of joy, so he has to be grateful for that. During breakfast, Cecil finds out that Alan is talentless. She doesn't miss the opportunity to brag about her own talent, saying that she's a wizardess and her elder brother is a swordsman. Granville scolds her, reminding her that she shouldn't brag about talents. Cecil understands her mistake when her brother Thomas starts crying, wondering why he's the only one without a talent. His father tries to cheer him up and tells him that he will attend Nobles College in the royal capital, since the Academy City is only for those with a talent. Later that day, since Alan has the afternoon off, he decides to head out of the manor to visit the market, which is a whole new world compared to the village. He's really excited to see the Adventurers Guild and decides to take a look inside right away, but the receptionist tells him that he has to be 12 or older to register as an adventurer. Alan still decides to gather some intel and checks the Adventurers Guild bounties on the wall. He sees some E-rank horned rabbit bounties, D-rank goblins and big toads, and C-rank orcs and armored ants, which are worth 3 silver coins. An adventurer named Raven suddenly approaches him to inform him that this isn't a playground, but Alan manages to get information out of him as well. Apparently, monster ranks go up the further they are from town, so the higher ranks live near the White Dragon Mountains. There's a B-rank murder galsh, which is worth 200 gold coins, but adventurers leave monsters like that to the knighthood due to how deadly they are. There's also a quest for the White Dragon, but no one takes that one because it's too powerful, though there are huge deposits of mithril inside the White Dragon Mountains, and some people are itching to mine it. That's why the reward has just been going higher and higher over the decades. Before he can ask any other questions, Raven's party, Rita and Milky, finally approach him and notice Alan's rare dark hair and eyes, so he decides to leave and thanks him for the information. Without wasting any time, Alan exits the city thanks to the Granvelle family crest and runs into the forest, free to battle as many monsters as he wants. A month later, Alan has gone monster hunting 4 more times since the first time, and now he's level 12. However, the Baron soon starts questioning what he's been doing, because he always returns at late hours. Having no other choice, Alan confesses that he's been hunting monsters in the forest outside of town. Granvelle doesn't see the problem with this, since Alan is the son of a legend, which means he can't help what's in his nature. He decides to allow him to continue hunting, only asking him to sell the horned rabbit meat to the Granvelle estate. Alan is surprised by the offer, and he gladly accepts, because it means he can hunt openly and make money off the meat. 6 months later, Alan heads into the forest on his day off, wanting to farm at least 100 goblins today, and maybe some horned rabbits to get more pocket money and magic stones. His day doesn't go as planned, though, though, because his summoned creatures alert him to Raven's party, letting him know they're in danger. Alan helps them defeat the goblins that had them surrounded, and he uses a leaf of life that he made using Beansy's ability to save Raven, who was about to bleed to death. As repayment for his help, Raven's party accept collecting 100 E-rank magic stones, since that's all Alan asked of them. When winter arrives, the Granvelle family doesn't have any boar meat to celebrate the festivities, since everything is always sent to the capital. Thomas is sad about this, so he decides to ask Alan to hunt a white deer next time. A white deer is a C-rank monster, so no one actually expects him to do it, but Alan actually manages to hunt one, just for the challenge and for the experience points, of course. After he saves the festivities, Sabas informs him that, in light of his recent accomplishments, they have decided to assign him a new position, which is huntsman. His two main duties will be hunting monsters to provide food for the family and rescuing townsfolk from any monster attacks, so he'll basically be a hunter employed by the Baron. Naturally, he must also continue being Cecil's manservant, not to mention his waiter duties, so he'll only need to work as a huntsman once a week or so. In March of the new year, Cecil is happy to finally see her elder brother Mihai, who started attending the academy last year. Mihai gives his sister a butterfly hairpin as a souvenir from the capital, and Cecil is more than happy, saying that she'll treasure it forever. Soon after his arrival, Mihai holds a duel with Xenoph, so Alan excitedly goes to the garden to watch, since he's never seen Xenoph using his sword. When Mihai sees the monsters Alan hunted that morning, he asks him to spar with him for a bit. The invitation takes him by surprise, but since Alan loves a good challenge, he accepts and uses Xenoph's mithril sword. However, Mihai has spent a whole year undergoing training in the renowned Academy City, so Alan soon realizes that he never stood a chance. After losing the duel, Alan understands that Mihai is so skilled because he trained with sword lords and cleared dungeons at the Academy City. Plus, being on normal mode means that he progresses 100 times faster than he does on hell mode. Alan asks him to spar with him again when he returns next year, and Mihai gladly accepts, asking him to take good care of his sister while he's away in exchange. Time after Mihai leaves in early April, Viscount Carnell visits the estate, so Granvelle politely welcomes him, even though he's clearly not happy to have him. Carnell is in charge of the neighboring fiefdom, on the other side of the White Mountains. The Viscount is one rank higher in social status over the Baron, and Carnell took a magic ship all the way from the royal capital just to drop by. The Granvelles and the Carnells have been at each other's throats for centuries, so Alan follows the head servant's advice and remains silent during their meeting. The White Dragon Mountains are filled with mithril deposits, and there are multiple mines in both territories, but because the White Dragon has made its nest on this side, they can't access any of theirs. That is why the Granvelle fiefdom is going through an economic downturn, but thankfully, the White Dragon is pretty fickle, so it switches to roost on the other side every 100 years. Hence, about a century ago, it was the Carnell fiefdom that was struggling instead. Carnell proudly informs Granvelle that his daughter underwent the appraisal ceremony, and she's fortunately talentless. Considering 2 of his 3 kids have talents, Granville is clearly not happy that Carnell came all the way here just to brag. This leaves Alan pretty confused though, because their reactions don't make sense to him. The commoners and serfs who he knows were all overjoyed to have a talent, which means there must be some kind of downside to it for nobles. Time after that, in early October, Alan uses his day off to meet with Raven's party, getting all the information he can about C-rank monsters. He's leveled up enough that farming D-rank monsters won't cut it anymore, so he wants to try something new. After getting some supplies, Alan heads for the forest and defeats a C-rank orc, earning a lot of experience points. He also finds a dangerous C-rank armored ant, and he barely manages to defeat it with desperate attacks, unable to get through its shell. A few days later, while the Gravel family is having lunch, the head servant Rickel suddenly barges in to inform them that there's an emergency because there's a murder gauche heading straight for the city. Granvelle is clearly alarmed by this because Xenoph and his forces are away on a monster hunt and won't be back for 2 days. Alan knows that the murder gauche is a B-rank monster, so the adventurers in this town have no shot at beating it. He also doesn't stand a chance, since he currently has no MP, so he decides only to provoke it and lure it towards the White Dragon Mountains. However, he ends up getting chased by that beast for 3 entire days, so he collapses as soon as he manages to make it back to the city. Despite how harrowing that journey was, Alan's courage is rewarded with 20 gold coins, which he uses to buy a mithril sword. Thanks to this, he's finally able to cut through the armored ant's shells, which allows him to get their magic stones. Alan continues experimenting with his summoned creatures after that, and in early March, Mihai visits the estate again, so he decides to have another duel with him to test his improvement. However, despite all his improvements and increased buffs, Mihai ends up beating him again. Later that day, while the Granvelles are peacefully talking, a knight suddenly barges in to inform them that the White Dragon has migrated. The news shocks everyone at the table, and Granvelle knows that if this is true, then it means they can go back to mining mithril after a century of waiting, and great prosperity will come to their fiefdom. Xenoph tells him that they should start by ascertaining the location of the dragon's new nest, and once that's done, he can have his knights check the status of the 4 mining sites. That means they'll need to clear out all the monsters between the city and the mine. The base of the mountains are littered with high-ranked orcs and goblin burrows, so it will take several months just to access the situation. Alan knows that this is going to be a problem though, because once the knights start clearing out the monsters around here, he'll lose his chance to farm experience. Because of this, he decides to formulate a plan and heads far away from town soon after that just to experiment. There's a lot to try now that he's at summon level 5, including the share skill he just obtained. This skill allows him to share his vision with his summon creatures and control them. The number of creatures he can use this skill with increases depending on his intelligence stats, and since he can use it to order them around, it is possible for Alan to hunt monsters using nothing but his summons now. He tests that out right away and decides to fight some armored ants nearby with his newest summons, Spidey, Teddy, Brawn, and Fillet. Each one of them covers a different role, and this powerful team manages to defeat all the armored ants in no time, so Alan seems pretty satisfied. When Alan's MP runs out, another one of his summons, Tater Tot, uses its ability, Crop of Magic, giving him a special fruit that recovers MP. Alan then uses the share skill with Chappie to see how everyone's doing at Crana Village. After seeing his family, he leaves a gold coin for them on the windowsill, promising to send them more money every month. Alan is 10 years old by October, and Xenof informs Granville about the status of the mines. Unfortunately, during the long stretch of time they went unused, the mines have become a nesting ground for monsters, and the nearby villages that served as mithril refineries have also been taken over by orcs and goblins. It would take at least 3 years to get the closest mine up and running, but Granville isn't satisfied by this, so he asks him to get it done as soon as possible, even though it won't be an easy job. He also warns him that there's no telling what Carnell will do now that his mines will have to shut down, so they must proceed with utmost caution. Alan realizes that the time has finally come, and the knights are going to wipe out all the monsters. He's made the most out of these last 6 months thanks to his summon creatures and the share skill, so once he turns 12, he's going to leave the Granvilles to become an adventurer. He still has 2 years, so he's going to spend that time returning the favor by exterminating some monsters, and he won't let the knights hog all the experience points. That's why he soon exterminates an entire goblin burrow using his summon creatures. After doing that, he decides that he'll wipe out the goblin burrows scattered around here one by one, and then, eventually, the orc burrow ruled by the orc king. In March of the new year, Mihai returns right after graduating from the academy, and Cecil is really happy that he's going to be living with them again. However, Mihai doesn't comment anything on this, and he instead asks Alan to duel with him with no holds barred. Alan is a lot stronger and faster now, but like always, he ends up losing the duel. Everyone can tell that Mihai is acting strange, and he finally confesses to Cecil and Thomas that he must leave to undertake the noble's duty, so he won't be coming home anytime soon. Cecil starts crying when she finds out he'll be gone for 3 years, and Alan soon understands why Carnell said it was a shame that 2 of Granville's kids got saddled with a talent. The Baron knew this would happen all along, and that's why Carnell's comment made him so mad back then. The very next day, Mihai says goodbye to his family with a smile, but before leaving, he suddenly pulls Alan close and asks him to watch after Cecil for him and to keep her safe. In May of the following year, Alan has subjugated every goblin burrow in the area over the past 6 months. Now that he's level 35, he decides it's time to wreck the orc burrow with his team. Everything goes well at first, but when the orc king finally shows up, Alan soon realizes that he can't keep this up, and Teddy can't even get close enough to attack. When they take down his defenses, a hit sends Alan flying and makes him crash into a wall, so he quickly recovers his HP. Right when he's about to give up, Xenof suddenly shows up, and he doesn't even mention anything about his summon creatures. Lebrand takes care of the magic orcs nearby, and Xenof single-handedly defeats the orc king with only 1 strike and without needing an extra skill. After everything's over, Xenof has no doubt that Alan is the one who took out the goblin nests, and he's pretty sure he has a talent too. Alan knows that he can't lie anymore at this point, and his cover's totally blown now, so he nervously confirms it, though he's not admitting to any more than that. Xenof informs him that the Baron already knows he has a talent, and that's what motivated him to promote him to huntsman. He clarifies that he can keep what he saw today a secret, but in exchange, he wants him to keep him informed of the progress of his monster hunts, because their goals are one and the same. Alan knows that he shouldn't undercut the knights just for the sake of farming more experience points, so he decides to accept. 2 weeks later, he earns 25,000 experience points after defeating 1 orc king with his summons, since he figured out the perfect strategy. In September, a royal messenger visits the Granville family to deliver Mihai's diary, explaining that everyone is expected to write periodic entries while at the barracks. Everyone is a little confused at first, until the messenger informs them that Mihai carried out his mission dutifully and has been laid to rest. The tragic news takes everyone by surprise, and Granville immediately loses it, because that's not how this is supposed to go. Such a thing couldn't have happened in just 6 months, especially since they knew that Mihai was fresh out of the academy. Despite how unfair the situation is, the royal messenger subtly lays down a threat, letting him know that he can't protest, or he'll have to talk to the king. With this clear, the royal messenger takes his leave, and the Baroness soon breaks down in tears, as well as the rest of the personnel in the house. Cecil is still clearly in shock by the news, so Granville decides to talk to her alone, telling her the truth. She soon finds out that her father already knew that Mihai was going to die, and it makes her wonder if the only reason they're alive is to be killed for this noble's duty. Cecil runs away in tears before Granville can say anything else, and seeing his expression, Alan realizes that there's just nothing they can do. He doesn't know if there's some catch to being a noble that that forces them to adhere to this deadly duty, but he just can't understand it because dying at 15 is just too cruel. Later that day, everyone in the estate panics when they realize Cecil is missing, so Alan doesn't wait a second and immediately runs, saying that he'll find her no matter what. When night falls, Alan finally finds her somewhere in the city, and she's clearly exhausted after walking aimlessly for so long. Even though she wants to be alone, Alan patiently waits by her side, giving her some food and listening to what she has to say. He understands that she's scared, so he asks her what she wants to do, but Cecil is not sure herself. All she thinks about is the words she read in Mihai's diary, where he said that at the end of the day, he wasn't doing this for the people or even his family, but because he chose to be there himself. When she thinks about this, Cecil decides to go back home, and she tells her parents that, as a member of the Granvelle household, she will meet her obligation to serve the noble's duty. Mihai said in his diary that the whole reason he did this was to overcome his own weakness, so now she's going to follow in his footsteps and won't flee from responsibility. In March, half a year has passed since Mihai's death, and life for the Granvelles has gone back to normal. The knighthood has wiped out all the orc boroughs, or mostly, because Alan and his summoned creatures did the dirty work. Back at the mansion, Zenoff informs Granvelle that they've finally started moving people to resettle the mithril refineries near the mines, and mining operations should be running at full steam come summer. A few days later, Alan reaches the armored ant nest in the White Dragon Mountains. He knows that these monsters could cause problems for the mithril miners, so he's going to wipe them out next. From what he's heard about armored ant nests, there should be over 1,000 soldiers inside, along with a B-rank queen monster who lays eggs to birth more. Alan decides to use his summoned creatures to clear as many armored ants as he can so he can reach the queen. However, after 2 entire months, Alan looks like he hasn't slept at all, and he's killed over 5,000 of these armored ants already. The fact that he hasn't progressed is driving him crazy, but one day he notices that the ants have stopped coming out of their nest, so it's time to stamp out the queen. The place is like a huge maze, but luckily Hollow, one of his owls, finally finds the queen armored ant with its night vision. The queen is like 3 times the size of a normal armored ant, except for the head, but Alan already knows how boss fights go, so he manages to defeat it with his strategy and earns 45,000 experience points. The next day, he brings the exoskeleton of the queen armored ant back to the estate, saying that he brought it back from a nest up in the White Dragon Mountains. Wiping out an entire ant colony is impossible for anyone, so they find it hard to believe at first, until Alan shows them genuine mithril ore, saying that he came across it in the chamber where the queen ant was. Alan tells them all the details and informs them about the location of the nest, showing them the map of the interior. Granvelle has no doubt he's telling the truth now, and since Alan has become the first to discover a brand new vein of mithril, that entitles him to a stake in the operation, so he'll grant him a 30% of the mining rights. In October, Alan finally turns 12, and he knows it's time to expand his horizons. But the royal messenger pays another visit, and this time he shows up with Viscount Carnell and a proposal in hand. Granvelle reads the proposal and realizes that they're suggesting that they co-manage the White Dragon Mountains and split all the profits equally. He calmly apologizes and explains that the proposal is too abrupt, so he must play it safe and visit the royal capital to appraise the situation first. The royal messenger gets furious at him, but Granvelle remains firm on his decision, so they have no other choice but to leave. Later that day, Alan is still thinking about the current situation, but his thoughts are suddenly interrupted when he hears a maid screaming Cecil's name in horror. He immediately runs to the place to see what's going on, and sees a group of mercenaries trying to take Cecil with them. Alan doesn't hesitate to fight them, but one of the mercenaries loses his patience and decides to throw a smoke bomb that puts him to sleep in no time. He later wakes up, tied up in a completely different place with Cecil, so he uses his summons and finds out they're on a magic ship. Alan also finds out that Carnell and the royal messenger are behind this, and they just took Cecil hostage to threaten Granvelle and steal the mining rights. Once he gets the information he needs, Alan fights the mercenaries and jumps out of the magic ship with Cecil in his arms. Despite all the buffs he used, landing makes him feel like he just broke both his legs, but he quickly uses a healing leaf on himself and Cecil as well. Without wasting any time, Alan starts running at high speed and summons multiple copies of Hollow to scout ahead for him, because he knows that Dagra, the leader of the mercenaries, will chase after them. The man has a tracking skill that allows him to follow their footsteps, so Alan jumps onto the buildings to keep running until he reaches the borders of the city. He then summons copies of Brawn, using its shields to jump in the air so they can move without leaving any footprints behind. After camping overnight in the forest, they continue running until they finally reach the northern Granvelle fiefdom border checkpoint. However, Alan decides it's time to leave as soon as they get there, because his summoned creatures let him know that Dagra has found their footprints. Worse yet, he shook off Hawkins, so now he can't see him, and it's possible that he figured out his ability. Alan knows that Cecil is cracking under the stress because this is too much for a 12-year-old, so he tries to reassure her and asks her not to worry, saying that Dagra can't catch up to them if they keep running at this pace. He also tells her that before Mihai left, he swore to him that he would keep her safe, so he's going to make sure they both get back home. After spending the whole night running, Alan uses a leaf of life to heal Cecil, and mentions that they should reach the Granvelle estate tomorrow. Despite this, Hawkins suddenly warns him about a threat nearby, and Alan soon finds out it's actually the murder Gulch he fought 3 years ago. Unlike Dagra, he knows that the murder Gulch won't hesitate to kill Cecil if it gets close, so Alan is forced to fight it. The beast gives him a good beating, but Alan gets a rush of adrenaline when his life is at risk, so he manages to make his dagger go through the Murdergalsh's head when it tries to eat him. Defeating it gives him 82,000 experience points, but Dagra unfortunately managed to catch up to them while he was busy. Alan is beaten without mercy, and even Cecil receives a blow when she tries to defend him with her magic. However, Alan sent Hawkins and Chappie to get Xenoff right after they crossed into Granville territory, so he gets there just in time. To his surprise, Xenoff activates his extra skill, Aura Blade, making a straight cut across a major part of the forest and dividing Dagra's body in half. Just like that, Alan and Cecil's harrowing 4-day escape comes to an end, and they finally make it back to the Granville's mansion. After telling Granville everything he found out, Alan decides to forego his claim on the mithril mining rights and return them to him. Also, he can use them as a bargaining chip to convince the king to conduct an extensive investigation and resolve this issue favorably. Granville decides to follow Alan's advice, so all the perpetrators face justice, and the Carnell fiefdom is dissolved and placed under royal rule. In light of their ordeal, Granville granted Cecil and Alan permission to attend a lecture on the details of the noble's duty. There, they learn about the central continent where they live, specifically in the kingdom of Ratash. To their north is a huge country known as the Empire of Giamat, and they are currently at peace, or at least that's history as far as the public is concerned. The true timeline is known as Demon Lord history, which began upon the Forgotten Continent. The Demon Lord first appeared here 112 years ago when he proclaimed himself Demon Lord of the End and demanded the leader of every country submit to his rule. Naturally, none of them agreed, and 50 years after that, or 62 years ago from their point of view, the Great Calamity happened. Every monster in the world went up by 1 rank, and the Demon Lord finally went on the offensive, invading the central continent with an army consisting of millions of monsters all B rank and higher. Many people perished, and 4 countries were wiped out within 4 short years. In the face of this threat, the Empire of Giamat stepped up to form the 5-Continent Alliance, which resulted in a system that called for each country to establish an academy. Any child blessed with a talent would then undergo training before being sent to the front lines. That wasn't sufficient enough to stop the Demon Lord army's invasion until the hero known as Helmios was born in the Empire and restored humanity's hope. The hero forced the Demon Lord army back and reclaimed the Empire's lost territory in just 5 years, and even now at age 22, he continues to lead the war effort on the front lines. The war against the Demon Lord army remains incredibly intense, even with the hero on their side, and half of the young soldiers sent to the front lines lose their lives. After learning about this, Granville speaks to Alan in November to give him all his corresponding rewards for all he's done. He also mentions that he asked the king for a pardon to get Cecil out of military service, but her talent as a wizardess is too valuable and can't be overlooked, so he refused his request. That's why he decided to turn his hopes to Alan, offering him 600 gold coins for him to accompany Cecil to the academy, then act as her bodyguard on the battlefield. Seeing how serious he is about this, Alan decides to tell him the truth, and confesses that he's a summoner. He promises that he will do everything in his power to keep Cecil safe, but instead of taking the gold reward, he wants his family and Krina's to be exempted from the head tax and to resign from his position as manservant. Granville easily agrees, and since he's been promoted from Baron to Viscount thanks in large part to his contributions, he gives Alan a special sword. This makes him one of his guests, and it's proof the Granville family will always stand behind him, no matter what situation he finds himself in. Alan just then understands that this is the conclusion of all the events he's triggered over the past 12 years. He always wondered why he got reincarnated into this world instead of just being teleported to it, and it turns out there was a good reason. Since the Demon Lord continues to pose a threat even after the hero arrived, they need him to help restore balance to the world. That's why Alan decides to accept Granville's quest, saying that he will venture forth with Cecil and they'll defeat the Demon Lord. After making that important decision, Alan decides to visit his family in person for the first time since he left Krina village. Both Teresia and Rodin are really happy to see how much he's grown during all these years, and it's almost hard to believe that it's been 4 years. Despite how long it's been, Teresia happily welcomes him and tells him that there is plenty of food so he can eat all he wants. Alan gladly accepts, and he's happy to see that both Mash and Mayula have grown up a lot too. Mash is really happy to see him again, but for some reason, Mayula hides behind her mother, still too shy to say anything to him. Alan is a little confused by her behavior, so Rodin explains that she was barely a year old when he was last here, so her memories of him are probably fuzzy. That information clearly shocks Alan because he's been playing with her through Chappie all this time, so he just assumed they were close. Putting that aside, Teresia tells him that they appreciate him sending them monthly letters and money, but she wants to know if he is still making enough to get by. Alan reassures them and informs them that things have changed, and he's now a guest of the Gravels instead of their manservant. He also mentions that he'll be going to Academy City come April, and despite how lightly he takes it, his parents are completely shocked by the news. Alan explains that it won't be as easy to send money after that, so he just brought a lump sum for them instead. Once again, Rodin and Teresia are shocked when they see that Alan brought a bag of 100 gold coins for them. His parents quickly tell him that they can't accept that because he's going to need it for life at the academy. Alan assures them that it's fine and clarifies that he still has 600 600 in savings from selling armored ants. That statement leaves his parents speechless, but Mash is simply excited to hear about monsters, so he asks his brother about it. Alan informs him that armored ants are insect monsters that nest at the foot of the White Dragon Mountains, and he came across a lot of goblin and orc burrows in that area too. After their initial shock, Roden and Teresia just smile, realizing that their son hasn't changed a bit, and he's still doing the unbelievable. Alan decides to leave after a while, saying that he has work waiting for him, so he can't stay any longer. Mash happily tells him that he's going to go to the academy when he turns 12 as well, so Alan assures him he'll be waiting for him. Before he leaves, Mula shyly approaches him, holding the letters he's been sending them, and wanting to know if he's truly her big brother from the letters. Alan confirms it with a smile and apologizes for being unable to visit them more often. In response, Mula simply hugs him, instantly bringing tears to his eyes. After receiving a warm hug from all his family, Alan says goodbye to them and finally leaves. Once he returns to the Granville's estate, he continues working as usual, so Cecil approaches him to ask him why he's sweeping the courtyard after quitting his manservant job behind her back. Alan tells her that he's just lending a hand until they leave for the academy, but for some reason, Cecil is grumpy about it. Putting her attitude aside, Cecil looks at him with a more serious expression and asks him if he's serious about coming to Academy City with her and fighting in the war, since the noble's duty doesn't apply to him. Alan simply reminds her that it's the job he was hired to do, but Cecil just thinks he's a weirdo for that. Before she can say anything else, someone suddenly shouts his name, and Alan tells her that his friends are here. He proudly introduces her to Krina the Sword Lord and Dagora the Axe User, since they're also coming to Academy City with them. After greeting his friends, Alan introduces them to Cecil and Thomas, saying that they're the children of the Granville family who he's been serving the past 4 years. Cecil quickly flips her noble switch on and kindly greets them, treating them very differently than she treats Alan. Krina, on the other hand, stays true to herself and excitedly greets her, asking her to be friends. Alan then asks them if they're all ready for the exam in 3 days, and Krina confidently confirms it, assuring him they're tough enough to take down great boars now. Cecil and Thomas are a little surprised by that, but Alan reminds her that it's an academic test, so he wants to know if she's been studying. Krina immediately plays dumb and dodges his question, but that alone lets him know the answer. Later that day, Granville invites them to dinner, offering his warmest welcome to Alan's friends. Krina and Dagora don't hold back and enjoy all the food, and even though Cecil is a little scared of how wild they are, Granville simply laughs, not minding at all. After dinner, Krina continues enjoying herself and then decides to ask what the academy is like, because she's heard there are dungeons and she wants to know if they'll fight a lot of monsters. Dagora tells her that he's more excited about what happens after graduation, since he'll be one step closer to his dream of joining the knighthood. Cecil just looks at them and discreetly asks Alan if they're not telling them about the war. Alan lets her know that they can't tell them about it, at least not until the time is right. After all, they do deserve to know about the risk to their lives. Krina will supposedly be dubbed a baron after graduating from the academy, which makes her duty bound to join the war effort alongside Cecil. As for Dagora, that's still up in the air, but he may get the option to enlist, depending on his track record after graduating. In any case, they're all attending the academy together, so Alan hopes they make friends with each other. He also thinks he should start praying to Elmia for the ability to check their stats. 3 days later, the 4 of them finally leave the Granville's estate and depart for Academy City. Once there, they're all really surprised by how big the city is, and Cecil mentions that there are multiple dungeons scattered in and around the city where students can brush up on their unique talents. After getting off the magic ship, the 4 of them take the train, where Alan can observe the high-quality craftsmanship from the dwarves of the Baucus Empire up close. They later arrive at the Ratash Academy, where a lot of people are waiting for the test. Cecil mentions that they say about 20,000 hopefuls come from all over the country to take this test every year. One of the examiners welcomes them to Kingdom of Ratash's Academy City and informs them that before the entrance exam, all applicants must undergo an appraisal ceremony. Dagora decides to go first, and after seeing his results, the examiner tells him that his attributes have an exceptional rating, so he can move on to the written exam. Even though he passed the test, Dagora is completely disappointed, because all his attributes are the same as when he was 5, so he doesn't understand what he's been training for. Alan isn't surprised though, because those ranks only reflect developmental speed, so they don't change based on age or level. After Cecil's appraisal, the examiner admits that her results are also impressive, and tells her that her attributes and talent are just what they're looking for. When it's Krina's turn, the crystal ball shines so brightly that it blinds everyone around, and the examiner immediately recognizes her as Krina the Sword Lord, so she tells her that they're glad to have her here. However, just like Dagora, Krina is disappointed to see that her attributes haven't changed since she was 5 years old. Lastly, when it's Alan's turn, the crystal ball shines even brighter, just like when he was 5 years old. Now his talent is visible to everyone, but when the examiner notices that all his attributes are ranked E, she tells him that he unfortunately failed the test. Alan clearly wasn't expecting that result, so he just freezes in place, realizing that even though the text glitch got fixed, his development speed is still dragged down by hell mode. Cecil doesn't understand how he failed, and she clearly doesn't agree with this result, but Alan tries to reassure her and tells her that there are still things for him to do here, even if he doesn't enroll in the academy. Cecil interrupts him, him, still not happy with the situation, and Krina agrees with her, unwilling to accept this. All the fuss draws the attention of two people from the academy, and Alan is surprised to see that one of them is an elf. Cecil doesn't even pay attention to who they are and immediately complains, saying that these results have to be wrong because she saw Alan single-handedly beat a murder gulch. The fact that he took down a murder gulch at his young age really surprises them, considering the fact that all his attributes are ranked E. One of them mentions that they've never seen this kind of result before, but now they know that he really does exist. Alan doesn't know what that means, but the elf admits that it's just as Master Rosen prophesied. When the other guy speaks again, everyone is surprised to hear that the elf is actually the headmaster, but Alan is more surprised to find out that the other guy is Helmios. After all, he and Cecil heard that name during their lecture on the Demon Lord, and they know that Helmios is the hero and hope of all mankind. Without a word, Helmios approaches Alan directly and observes him up close, saying that his attack is at 570, and his MP and intelligence are all the way at 1,600. Alan soon realizes that he's using an appraisal skill that lets him see his stats, though he really hopes he quits telling the whole world about it. Helmios admits that in terms of attributes, Alan is about on par with an archwizard, but he doesn't have any magic skills, so he's really a weird one. Alan is a little irritated by that comment, but Helmios apologizes and explains that the appraisal plate wasn't working properly apparently. Cecil quickly asks him if that means he can take the exam, and Helmios confirms it, but he clarifies that he has to show him what he can do with his summoner talent. Cecil easily agrees to this, but Alan doesn't let her speak and immediately declines, telling Helmios that he has no idea who he is. With this in mind, Helmios properly introduces himself, saying that harrowing is his deal. Alan plays dumb and tells him that he can't say he's heard of him, but given that he's taken a look at his attributes, it only seems fair that he shows him his own with that crystal ball. Helmios has no problem with this, so he shows everyone his attributes through the appraisal plate, letting them see nothing but A and S ranks. Now that Alan knows his stats, he decides to show him his summoner talent, but he simply summons Mousy in his hand and then excuses himself without another word. The written test covered basic subjects like math, vocabulary, and history, but also questions that gauge their ability to deal with different types of monsters. Dagora got a B as a result, while Krina barely got a C and Alan got an S. Meanwhile, Cecil just bitterly wonders why she got an A and not an S, like Alan. After passing the test, the four of them receive their uniforms, celebrating the fact that they're all officially students now. Cecil asks Alan where he thinks they should live, since they have the option of staying at the dorms. Alan tells her that he thinks they should rent a house instead, but before that, he also mentions that he heard that students need to apply for adventurer cards, so they should go to the Adventurers Guild. Once there, the receptionist tells them that she'll explain how dungeons work around here while they get their cards printed. She informs them that the dungeons accessible from this city are separated by difficulty, so there are 3 ranks, C, B, and A. The bottom floor of each dungeon has a treasure chest guarded by a boss monster, and it may contain a rare item, so they must do their best to get one. Alan is clearly interested in these rare items, because he already knows exactly which one he wants. He decides to ask the receptionist if it's possible for him to put in a request with the guild for some D-rank magic stones. When the receptionist asks him how many he wants, Alan tells her that he'll offer 100 gold coins for 10,000 D-rank magic stones. That clearly takes her off guard, but the receptionist nervously agrees and asks him to come back in a week. Alan would like to stock up on at least 2 million of them during his 3 years at the academy, so he thanks the receptionist. She later gives them their adventurer cards and explains that they'll have to start from E rank. Now that they have their cards, the 4 of them decide to register as a party as well, since they plan on adventuring together. Alan comes up with a name for their party, saying that they'll be the No-Life Gamers, a title for people who go hardcore and devote all of their time to becoming the strongest they can be. He had to balance gaming with work in his previous life, so he never was a true no-life gamer, but things are different here, so he can be the GOAT in this game. After registering as a party, the 4 of them get a huge house where they can live, since it's normal in Academy City for people from parties of 10 or 20 to live together. Now that they're settled in, Alan decides to speak to Krina and Dagora with the truth, saying that he and Cecil have a long-term goal, and it's something they have to do after graduating from the academy in 3 years. After learning the truth about the Demon Lord, both Krina and Dagora are surprised, since they never imagined the academy was meant to recruit soldiers for war. Alan informs them that he's going to fight alongside Cecil and defeat the Demon Lord, but that statement takes Cecil by surprise. Before she can even process the information, Krina excitedly asks him to count her in, saying that she'll fight with them. Alan thanks her, because he was actually hoping she'd say that, but he then asks Dagora what he'll do, since they say half of those who go to the front lines never come back alive. Dagora simply mentions that whoever takes down the Demon Lord would be more exalted than a knight, and that's more than enough to convince him, so he asks Alan to sign him up. Once that's decided, Alan's grimoire informs him that Krina, Cecil, and Dagora have joined his party. However, to his surprise, all 3 of them can actually see his grimoire now, so he explains that it's part of his talent. Krina then asks him how they should start preparing to beat the Demon Lord, and Alan clarifies there's a whole list of things to do. They pass trials to become stronger while clearing dungeons and get better equipment, and he'd also like to add a cleric who can heal to their party. Alan decides to tell them that his skills actually develop 100 times slower than normal, so he needs a big stock of magic stones and MP to pass his trials. Ultimately, he mentions that he's hoping to find an MP recovery ring in one of the dungeon treasure chests. Cecil and the others now understand why he put in a request for all those stones, and Alan lets them know that things are about to get really busy. The next day at the academy, their homeroom teacher introduces himself as Karlova, saying that he's guildmaster of the Adventurers Guild in the royal capital. He mentions that he's a swordmaster and explains that he was called upon since they have a sword lord joining this year. Karlova lets them know that they've got big tests in July and February, and any score less than 40 is apparently an F, so they must study hard. Lastly, he reminds them that the student body here includes serfs, commoners, and nobles, but the only thing that really matters is talent. That's why they're throwing all honorifics and titles out the window, and they must forget their social status. Not all students are happy about that, but Alan just takes the opportunity to tell Cecil that she won't hear more fancy schmancy talk from him anymore. To his surprise, Cecil immediately drops her noble act and holds him in a chokehold, saying that he made that change too quickly for her liking. Karlova sees them and tells everyone that those two are setting a good example already, but Cecil gets embarrassed when all their attention lands on them. Alan later learns that at the academy, they have 4 days of classes and 2 days off a week. The afternoon classes are tailored to their talents, which means there aren't any for Summoner, and Alan got permission to use that time freely, so he plans to take part in a little of every class. Soon enough, their first day off arrives, so Alan's party wastes no time and heads for the entrance to a dungeon in the middle of town. So far, it just seems like a normal building, but as soon as they go through one of the doors, some kind of system welcomes them to the C-rank dungeon. This system informs them that it'll now direct them to another dimension where the dungeon is located. It explains that all travel through the dungeon is separated by isolated rooms, therefore other adventurers cannot enter theirs. Alan is just glad to know that he doesn't have to worry about anyone else seeing his summoner skills, though the others don't really understand his excitement. Once they step into the dungeon, Alan uses Hawkins to explore the area and creates a map of the floor in his grimoire in a matter of seconds. He explains that the monsters here are all lower rank, so they shouldn't waste time beating any more than necessary, and they should ignore the treasure chests as well. The plan is to conquer the C-rank dungeon as fast as possible, so they can move on to B rank. Now, with his grimoire, Alan is able to take a look at everyone's stats, since they're part of his party. With this, both Krina and Dagora can see their own skills, even though they still don't know how they work. The 4 of them quickly move through the dungeon, defeating all the monsters in the way. All Cecil, Krina, and Dagora pass a trial of the gods in no time, easily leveling up thanks to the experience points. They soon move on to the next room, where Dungeon General Operations System C328-02 welcomes them, asking them if they want to call it quits or challenge the next floor. The system lets them know that their progress gets saved and they can start from here next time, and they can re-enter the dungeon as much as they want. With that in mind, Alan and the others end their first day of dungeon crawling after clearing the first floor. They decide to spend all their days off on progressing through the dungeon, and Alan sends his summon creatures to farm monsters even during class. Clearing out 1 floor a day results in about 200 magic stones, so it's the perfect strategy that only a summoner can pull off. On their 5th expedition, they finally reach the final floor of the C-rank dungeon, and Alan decides to defeat the boss and all the monsters on the floor on his own to show them what his talent can do. All his summon creatures do the job for him, so everything goes smoothly, and he manages to clear the floor in no time. The party finds a steel sword in the treasure chest, and Alan congratulates them because they've officially beat their first dungeon. The receptionist at the Adventurers Guild later informs them that their adventurer cards have been upgraded to D rank, and they get 2 gold coins out of that steel sword. They're off to a promising start, so the 4 of them celebrate and decide to keep it up as the no-life gamers. On another day at the academy, Alan greets one of his classmates, Rifle, who asks him if he heard that Dverg the Sword Lord is coming here next month to teach a special class, and the hero apparently will be coming with him too. Alan is excited to hear about Dverg the Sword Lord, but he's not impressed to hear the hero's name at all. When the class begins, Karlova informs them that 3 months from now, over summer break, they'll be tasked with beating a dungeon, and anybody who fails will be expelled. One of the rules is that they can only form parties of 8 or less, and they can't get help from seniors or anybody from outside the academy. Karlova warns them that they must be aware that a number of students die during this every year, so they have to make sure they're well prepared. Without wasting any time, one of the students stands up and announces that he's recruiting for his party, so he wants to know if there are any spear or axe users in this class. Another student does the same and says that he's looking for mages, and soon everyone in the class tries to form their parties. Several students approach Krina since they definitely want a sword lord in their party. Alan is aware that they're using an old recruit from chat strategy, inviting strangers into their party to accomplish a short-term goal. Krina asks him for help, so Alan decides to show them how to really do this. He stands in front of the class with his party and announces that they're also looking for one person with a healing talent to join them. Alan lets them know that the 4 of them have already conquered 2 C-rank dungeons, and he shows them his D-rank adventurer card as proof. He then explains that they typically go dungeon crawling twice a week, so they have to dedicate at least 1 day a week to join their party. Alan also mentions that they split all treasure evenly, and since they're a small party, that means bigger profits overall, so they can't miss out. Despite how appealing that sounds, during lunch, Cecil tells him that nobody came to take up his offer, so maybe there are no clerics in their class. Alan tells her that it's probably because most kids with a healing talent get taken in by the church, and he figured it wouldn't be simple anyway. Just then, a boy from their class approaches Alan and introduces himself as Keel, saying that he happens to be a cleric and that he'd be interested to hear more about his party if he's still looking for a healer. Alan internally cheers and instantly agrees, asking him to have a seat so they can discuss it over lunch. Keel hesitates and tells him that he's trying not to eat during the day, so he's only having water. Alan is a little confused by this since he doubts this guy needs to be on a diet so extreme. He simply tells him that it wouldn't feel right if they just ate while he has nothing, so he insists and asks him to let him treat him to some food. Keel hesitantly accepts the offer after his insistence, and to everyone's surprise, he actually eats a lot despite what he said. Alan realizes that he was actually hungry all along, which confuses him even more. Keel eats all the food in a matter of seconds and decides to immediately cut to the chase, asking him how rich they get from dungeons. Alan informs him that as of right now, they each earn 20 to 40 silver coins per dungeon cleared. Keel can't hide his shock at that number since it's clearly more than he expected, so he asks him if he can join them on a trial basis. Alan obviously agrees because they need a cleric right now, so Keel tells him that they can count him in next weekend. Krina cheers and offers him some of her food, telling him that they're glad to have him. Dagora also offers him some veggies, so Keel thanks them both, but he asks Alan why so much politeness. Alan just smiles and asks him not to let him bother him, but deep down, he knows it's because he can't let a precious cleric slip away, so he'll butter him up as much as he has to. The following weekend, Alan's party dives into the dungeon with Keel, who's surprised to feel powered up all of a sudden after Krina defeats a monster. Alan explains that it's something normal, and it's because he passed a trial of the gods. Keel is a little confused by this because he hasn't even done anything, but Alan informs him that being friends in the same party means they all get stronger when anyone beats a monster. On the third day of their dungeon crawl, they finally find the boss monster for the final floor. This time, Alan lets Krina, Cecil, and Dagora do their thing without interfering, so he just watches them with Keel. Cecil uses her magic to cast a flame lance against the goblins, while Dagora makes use of his axe user talent. The boss monster launches a magic attack towards them, so Krina quickly dodges it, but the attack is directed at Keel, who has no time to react. Just before the attack hits him, Alan summons Braun right in front of him to protect him, making sure he's okay. Krina then defeats the boss and apologizes to Keel for that, since he was almost hit. Dagora complains about the cut on his arm, saying that he was so distracted trying to use his skill that he let his guard down. Keel approaches him without a word and uses his skill to heal the wound in just a few seconds, so Dagora thanks him. Alan thinks it's a shame he can't see his stats, since he's only a guest, but he decides to ask him how he learned how to use healing magic. Keel tells him that he learned by using it on wounded people at the church, and they told him he could earn 10 silver coins a day, so he spared no effort to learn it. Alan admits that it's a well-paying job, and Krina just says that she's jealous they can use skills. Keel quickly tries to make her feel better and clarifies that it took him 2 months of practice to get it right. He completely forgets about it when the treasure chest suddenly appears in the room, causing him to run directly towards it to check their reward. Alan mentions that it's a silver treasure chest, so they got lucky today. The treasure chest contains a mithril buckler, so as soon as they get out of the dungeon, Alan sells it for 15 gold coins. Keel immediately asks him if they'll split it evenly, so Alan confirms it and gives him 3 gold coins and a fifth of all the magic stones they got today, which he can exchange for even more money. That leaves Keel pretty satisfied, and Alan notices that he seems way more focused on the money than their summer break assignment. He can't complain though, because that actually works better for them. Since everything went very smoothly, Alan decides to ask him how he feels about joining their no-life gamers party. He mentions that they've rented a house that they all live in together, so he wants to know if he's interested. Everyone is eager to welcome him into their party, but Keel apologizes and tells them that he'll have to pass. After all, he heard having the cleric talent is a big deal at the academy, so he wants the option to work with other parties that might pay more to have him. He doesn't plan on being exclusive to one, because he needs to earn as much as he can. With that clear, Keel simply leaves, and Alan assumes that he wants to be freelance. A month later, Alan's summoner skill finally levels up, so he immediately goes out for some practice, celebrating the fact that he's hit his next milestone. His card inventory is up to 60 now, and he has unlocked the awakened skill, though he doesn't know what kind of skill that is yet. He goes to a C-rank dungeon to test it, and ends up spending most of his money in magic stones. He thinks it was totally worth it though, because after 2 years and 11 months, he finally gets some new faces on the roster. Without waiting another second, he summons all his new C-rank creatures, including a beast type called Bacon, a bird type called Fran, an insect type named Pion, a fish type named Finny, and a stone type named Steely. Lastly, there's also a grass type eggplant named Mapo, which has a lot of MP. After summoning all these creatures, Alan wastes no time and decides to unlock the newest type of summon creature. By trying all the possible combinations, he creates a new type of summon, a rank C spirit type. When he summons it, a doll-like spirit greets him, so Alan assumes she can talk because of her high intelligence stat. The spirit asks him to give her a name, so Alan decides to call her Maria, which makes her really happy. happy. As she floats around the room, Alan is surprised to see that she can phase through walls, and she reminds him it's because she's a spirit. This will definitely come in handy during dungeon crawls, and Maria also lets him know that she can pop into the dreams of any humans he wishes to curse with nightmares too. Alan thanks her and declines the offer, of course, moving on to test his new awakened skill. When he uses the skill on Denka, he gains the Swarm Awakened ability, which allows Denka to multiply itself. Alan gets a little startled at first, but he just assumes that's another powerful weapon to add to his arsenal, and he's glad he didn't try using it in the house. The next day at the academy, all the students are excited to see Diverg the Sword Lord, Sylvia the Sword Lord, and Helmios the hero. Alan just hopes that Helmios notices Diverg is a way more popular champion than him. Karlova informs all the students that the three of them took time to pay a special visit to their academy today, so he wants to know if anybody has questions for them. Krena immediately speaks up and asks Diverg how she can learn how to use skills. Diverg asks her why she wants to use skills, and Krena tells him that she wants to become stronger, like Alan. Helmios lets him know that she's talking about the raven-haired boy he told him about before. Diverg glances at Alan for a second, and then asks Krena to come with him, so Helmios and Sylvia focus on the rest of the class. Alan, Cecil, and Dagora go with Krena to see her training with Diverg, who asks her to strike at him and focus her mind on using her skill. Alan observes attentively, because he wants to see how well Krena stacks up against a veteran with 40 years on the front lines. Krena attacks Diverg while saying the name of her skill, Slash, but Diverg easily blocks her and tells her that's no skill. He pushes her backwards with just a move of his sword, but Krena doesn't give up and lunges at him again, repeatedly trying to use the Slash skill. Diverg simply continues repelling her attacks with ease, asking her if she wants to give up and take a year to learn the proper way instead. Krena refuses to give up and decides to keep going, no matter how many times he makes her fall. Alan understands that she must already feel like she's behind, since both he and Cecil can use skills. By the time the sun sets, they're still going at it, even though Krena is already exhausted. Alan continues watching in silence, hoping that Diverg finally gives her some real advice at least. When Krena falls again, Diverg asks her if she wants to call it quits, but Krena manages to stand back up, saying that Alan wouldn't give up in her shoes because he's never been the type. She explains that whenever she saw him, he was challenging himself or racking his brains about something because he's chasing after a big dream, so she needs to step it up and get tougher. Her determination surprises everyone, and Diverg tells her that in that case, she must empty her mind of everything but her skill and throw her full might at him. Krena decides to do just that, suddenly raising her sword with a blank expression and saying the word slash once. Without realizing it, a single move of her sword manages to fracture Diverg's sword when he blocks her, sending a powerful shockwave around them. Just like that, Diverg finally acknowledges her, saying that she did well and that she must remember this moment. Krena smiles when she realizes that it worked, but she instantly collapses, so Alan runs to catch her. Diverg then explains that he got the feeling she was more suited to hands-on learning instead of watch and mimic, but he's impressed she did it in just one day. Alan uses a leaf of life on her, so Krena instantly recovers and thanks Diverg for the lesson. Helmios just thinks that it takes a real maniac to go that hard on a 12-year-old, and Alan couldn't agree more. Putting that aside, Helmios asks him if he's going to tell him what this big dream of his is, but Alan only smiles and clarifies that he'll find out after he's convinced he can trust him. The following weekend, Alan introduces his party to Maria, letting them know that she's going to live with them as a bodyguard of sorts. He also shows them one of his newest summons, Fran, which they can use for fast transportation and to save some energy. This makes dungeon crawling smoother, and Krena now can use her skill whenever she wants, so they all get C-rank adventurer status in no time. Alan tells everyone that they should celebrate with a feast, saying that it'll also be a welcome party for Keel. Despite this, Keel tells him that he can't do that because he would feel bad for his family. He explains that everybody moved here with him after he enrolled in the academy, but it's been hard to make a decent living because they have no connections here. That's why enjoying a feast on his own would make him feel guilty. Alan tells him that it just so happens that they're looking to hire someone to help with chores around the house, so he wants to know if his family would be willing to do that and live with them at the same time. Keel is a little shocked by the offer, and Alan explains that they have plenty of empty rooms they can use, and naturally, they'll pay a fair salary. When Keel asks him why he'd go that far, Alan tells him it's because they're friends and because it's hard to watch him live in poverty. Cecil agrees with him and suggests splitting their treasure from the dungeon 6 ways instead. She explains that the extra 1/6 would be used as the salary for Keel's family, and in return, he would give all his magic stones to Alan. Krena clarifies that Alan needs a bunch of magic stones to get his level up, so this deal would benefit them both. After thinking about it for a moment, Keel thanks them and decides to accept the deal, so he later shows up at their house with his family. Alan gladly welcomes them, though he's a little surprised when he doesn't see any parents with them. Keel's younger sister introduces herself as Nina and tells them that they're most grateful to be invited into their home. Alan invites them inside for the feast, saying that there is plenty of food to go around, so they can help themselves to seconds if they want. Keel tells him that he can stop being so formal around him, so Alan easily accepts, but he notices that Keel's name hasn't shown up in his grimoire, even though they're friends now. Cecil tells Keel that she's surprised to learn that he's a member of nobility, and mentions that the way his sister introduced herself was a dead giveaway. Keel clarifies that they're former nobles, to be exact, because their family was stripped of their titles, which is how he ended up up living with his sister and their servants who had no place to go. Cecil apologizes for bringing it up, but Keel tells her it's no problem for him, since he's used to the commoner lifestyle, but he's more worried about his sister. Nina tells him that she will do her part to help with the chores just like everybody else. Dagora reassures them and says that they don't care about social status, and Alan lets them know that he and Krina actually rose up from serfdom. That clearly surprises them, and Keel admits that it makes sense for Krina, but he can't believe Alan has that kind of background, since he actually thought he and Cecil were both from nobility. Cecil tells him that he's half right because she is actually a noble, but she clarifies that they don't have to worry about that, since they're all equals at the academy. Alan lets them know that they're from a village out on the frontier, and Cecil is the daughter of the baron who rules over it. The moment Cecil mentions it's the Granvelle fiefdom, Keel suddenly stands up abruptly and looks at her with hatred and rage, exclaiming that it's all her fault and that she destroyed the Carnell family. That's when he reveals that he's the son of Cabroni Carnell and explains that a royal messenger told him everything, so he knows it was all a plot by the Granvelle family. Alan just then realizes that the talentless daughter who Carnell came to brag about that one time at the Granvelles is Nina, and his son with a talent is Keel. Cecil tries to remain calm and tells Keel that he's been misled, so she'll be happy to explain everything once they have everyone else leave the room. Once they're alone, Cecil explains that Viscount Carnell was trying to steal the Granvelle fiefdom's mithril mining rights, and part of his plan involved hiring assassins, who then captured both her and Alan, her manservant. She was able to escape safely with Alan's help, and afterwards, her father appealed directly to the king, and all the perpetrators were incarcerated. Cecil clarifies that she won't deny the fact that her father had a role in the end of the Carnell family, but she thinks there is no shame in that. Keel is clearly shocked by the information because he never thought his father would be capable of doing such terrible things. He confesses that his father took good care of him until he turned 5, at least from what he remembers, but everything changed after the appraisal ceremony. He was clearly not happy about his results, and that's where his childhood memories of his parents ended. He was separated from his family and had to move to another town, where he lived on a small allowance and didn't get any of the education typical for nobles. A tutor showed up when he turned 10, and hearing that his father had sent one to prepare him for the academy was exciting. It felt like he was still part of the Carnells, like he had his own role to play, until October last year, when his allowance stopped coming without any explanation. Nina then showed up with some servants who were now jobless with his parents gone. That's when he started working at the church, and a royal messenger visited them just before the end of the year, saying that the Carnell family had been dissolved due to a plot by the Granvelles. He also heard about the nobles' duty to defeat monsters, and they told him if he served for 5 years, the king had granted permission to forgive all their crimes and reinstate the nobility of the Carnells, with him as the head of the family. Cecil is a little confused by this, because it should only be 3 years, normally. Alan knows that this means there are still more royal messengers scheming out there. Keel apologizes for what his father did, and tells Cecil that he won't hold it against her if she wants to kick them out of their house. Even so, he's going to do whatever it takes to restore the Carnells to nobility, and he will fill in his father's shoes to make sure their family has a place to call home again. Alan tells him that the 4 of them also have a goal to achieve, and they're all on the same path, so he should serve in the war with them. Half of those sent to the front lines die within 3 years, and the death rate is even worse for 5 years, but he doubts the royal messenger mentioned that to him. They have to get much stronger to have any hope of defeating the Demon Lord, and a huge part of that is having him join their team. Everyone tries to convince Keel to join them, even if he insists, and says that all he does is to achieve his own personal goals. Cecil tells him that she'll be the first Granvelle to ever live under the same roof as the Carnells, but she's okay with that. Alan reminds him that he doesn't have to shoulder all the burden by himself, so they can all give it their best together. All their kind words bring him to tears, so Keel finally accepts, and Alan's grimoire informs him that he has officially joined his party. In May, Keel's servants finish bringing in all the luggage, so he and his family officially move into Alan's house. It seems like their new living arrangement will work out, and Alan knows that Keel dreams of restoring the Carnells to nobility. Supposedly, a royal messenger promised that would happen after he served 5 years on the front lines, but that seems fishy, so he decides it'll be better to check it out. Once Keel and his family are settled in the house, Alan informs them that it's time for them to conquer the B-rank dungeon. As soon as they get into the dungeon, Dagora mentions that it doesn't seem very different from the C-rank dungeon, but Cecil clarifies that the monsters inside here should range from D to B rank. Besides, there are poison and arrow traps as well, so she thinks they should take a panacea ahead of time. Everyone but Alan decides to do it, even though they don't really enjoy the taste at all. Alan checks the map in his grimoire he made with Hawkins's help, and decides they are ready to move on. Before anything, he warns them that he heard only a fifth of challengers managed to clear this dungeon, so they have to take it seriously. Once that's clear, he summons 5 copies of Fran for each one of them, so they finally dive into the dungeon and reach the 4th floor in no time. There, Keel gets very excited to see a treasure chest, and he doesn't hesitate to try and open it. Cecil stops him before he can do anything though, and explains that it is obviously a trap. Alan agrees and asks Maria to go have a look, and as soon as she tries to open it, the treasure chest transforms into a monster, letting them know it's a mimic. Even though they're facing a dangerous monster, Keel is just disappointed that there's no treasure, but Alan wastes no time and asks Maria to use psychokinesis. She quickly follows his instructions and manages to defeat the mimic after several attacks, helping Alan earn 20,000 experience points. Everyone is impressed that she actually could beat it since mimics are B-rank monsters. With this, Alan learns that Maria with enhanced stats can beat even a B-rank monster using only half her MP. Now that the mimic's been beaten, Keel is pleased to see that there is actually a treasure chest, and they soon find out that it contains a mithril halberd. Alan mentions that they can get upwards of 50 coins for it, and Keel couldn't be happier about it. The group decides to keep going, but even though everything seems to be going well, at some point, Alan's vision suddenly goes black. When he wakes up, he's very confused by everything, having no idea what happened. He assumes he got hit by a sleeping trap, and Cecil scolds him for not listening to her when she said he should take a panacea earlier. Alan clarifies that he didn't take one on purpose, and he then asks Maria to tell him what happened. The others are a little confused by his reaction, but they decide to just let him be, not understanding a thing. Maria informs him that Fran stepped on a tile and activated a trap, so a bunch of white gas came out. After that, all the Frans fell asleep, but everyone else was fine, so Alan assumes the sleeping trap didn't work on the others because they had taken a panacea. He asks Maria what made him wake up, and she informs him that she used a garnish on him, the item that comes from Mapo's ability. With this in mind, Alan decides to activate the sleeping trap on purpose this time, finding out that it has a range of 5 meters. He also realizes it's not making him sleepy, which means the garnish must still be in effect. Fran fell asleep, but Maria didn't, so he decides to check what happens to his other summons. After experimenting for a while, Alan finally figures it out and explains that up until now, all his grass-type summons produced recovery items for HP and MP, so he had an inkling of what would be next. Now he's completely sure of it and understands that garnish is a status recovery item. Sleep traps are guaranteed to work on animal-type summons, but they have no effect on grass or spirit types. While he speaks relentlessly about this, Dagora continues swinging the mithril halberd, training non-stop until he finally manages to use his skill for the first time. Everyone cheers for him when they realize he figured it out, and Dagora is happy to know he can finally use skills. Alan checks his stats in the grimoire and confirms it, noticing that Dagora's skill experience really did go up. Now Dagora is more excited and motivated than ever, so he tells Alan that if he's finished investigating, they should go back to dungeon crawling because he wants to best out his skill. Alan accepts and decides to move forward, and after 2 months of dungeon crawling over the weekends, they finally reach the last floor of the B-rank dungeon. There, they find the B-rank boss monster of this dungeon, which is called a huge boar. Keel mentions that this monster is one step up from a great boar, and Dagora admits that it does look like a bigger and meaner version of the boars they hunted back home. Alan is not worried about their chances though, based on these stats, since everyone raised their skill levels to 3 over the past 2 months. He always thought Summoner was special for the buffs that he gets from his creatures, but it turns out everyone has similar skills, and they level up really fast in normal mode, so they're bound to outpace him. Before the battle, Keel casts a spell called High Protect on everyone, and Cecil decides to go first, casting a powerful flame lance to attack the huge boars. Alan then summons 2 copies of Teddy and makes them use their once-per-day awakened skill, Devour. He asks Krena and Dagora to fight the boss, so the 2 of them run directly towards the huge boar and use their skills. Once the huge boar is down, Alan asks Krena to strike its vitals, so she jumps high in the air and uses her slash skill to beat the boss. With this, Alan's grimoire informs him that he's earned 24,000 experience points, and he confirms that Krena's swordlord skills truly are deadly. Keel casts High Heal on everyone to make sure they don't have any injuries, and he then immediately runs to the treasure chest, exclaiming that they got a silver one. In the treasure chest, they find scarletite knuckles, which are made of a material harder than mithril. Alan mentions that something like this will fetch a couple hundred gold coins at the market, so Keel jumps from happiness. When he sees his reaction, Alan begins to believe that Keel just really loves money, even though he likes to say it's for his family. It didn't take long to clear their first B-rank dungeon, so Alan is glad to see that they've really toughened up. Considering how strong they are, normal mode is nothing to laugh at, yet the fact humanity is struggling against the Demon Lord's army just goes to show how powerful the monsters are. That's why he has to make sure everyone reaches a high level before they graduate, himself included. In July, Alan explains that he sent his creature brigade to fight in the B-rank dungeon over the past month, successfully farming 34,760 C-rank magic stones and 425 gold coins. He put in a request for 310,000 D-rank magic stones by using C-rank ones for seed money. The receptionist at the guild informs him that the quest limit is 50,000 per month though. Alan's party used their treasure funds to buy new equipment, including a cart that makes travel to and from the house easier, and a magic-operated clock to keep track of time during dungeon crawls. As for the end-of-semester exam, all of them successfully passed, miraculously. By early August, they had conquered their second B-rank dungeon, and the academy went into summer break for 2 months. Alan decides to use his share skill to control Popo and visit his family, but this time, he actually talks to them through his summon, surprising them all. Gerda freaks out a little when he hears Alan's voice coming from the bird, and Roden just asks him how he got there. Alan clarifies that he's still in Academy City, but he's speaking with them through his bird, Popo, and he can see them through him as well. Teresia mentions that's quite a strange power, but she doesn't question it, and Mash is simply glad to know about his brother. Alan lets him know he brought a letter for him, and he tells Gerda that there's some from Krena and Dagora too. Gerda is glad to know about this, but he remembers the fact that he can't actually read, so Alan just tells him that he'll read it for him later. Rodan tells him that it's great to hear that they're all getting along, and Gerda admits that the things he can do with his talent just get crazier every time. Mula feels a little sad that she didn't get a talent, but Alan makes her feel better and tells her that it means she's samesies with their parents. Rodan then tells him that he has exciting news and informs him that he's going to be the chieftain of a new frontier village, so they'll be moving in April of next year to start breaking ground. Alan is very happy to hear that, so he congratulates him, and Gerda mentions that he's taking his family there too, as well as Dagora's family. Alan's parents are well into their 30s now, so he thinks this is the perfect time to start a new chapter of their lives. He decides to tease his father a little, saying that he should start learning to read and write if he wants to be a good chieftain, and Gerda assumes that the same goes for him. After seeing his family, Alan pays a visit to Granvelle to inform him about everything, letting him know that he met Carnell's son. He explains that tensions were high at the start, but Keel became a good friend after they talked it all out, and they've been taking classes and exploring dungeons together with him. Granville stays at ease, knowing that he doesn't need to worry if Alan is vouching for him. However, Alan also informs him that Keel apparently met with a royal messenger who promised to reinstate the Carnell family if he serves 5 years in the war effort. Granville hasn't heard anything about that, so Alan tells him that the royal messenger could be making false promises. Granville mentions that reinstating the Carnells to nobility is possible, and the royal highness could make it so. However, if Keel has the talent of a cleric, then this is likely to be a scam. After all, any who return from the war alive are guaranteed to receive special treatment, which is why many nobles willingly send their children to the front lines. Except they are keen on having someone with a healing talent nearby to keep them safe. Serfs and commoners with healing talents are usually employed to help the sick and injured within the kingdom, so there are few on the front lines. To an extent, the elves of Rosenheim help them to make up the difference, but they can't operate individually for various reasons. This makes clerics especially valuable, leading many to be exploited and work to the bone as personal healers for young nobles. Nobles forge secret pacts among each other to keep these clerics at the front lines even after they finish their compulsory service, and it's so bad that some supposedly never return except in coffins. Granvelle reminds him that Carnell sent Keel away the instant that he learned of his talent, which indicates to him he planned on using the boy as a tool eventually. Alan is shocked that Carnell could do something so despicable, but it all makes sense to him now. After Keel became a commoner, the royal messenger tricked him into joining the war effort, but the one thing he doesn't know is what their endgame is, and how this benefits the royal messenger. He also considers the possibility of another mastermind pulling the strings behind them. Despite his greedy habits, he knows that Keel is a good guy, and he's only trying to save enough money for his family to live comfortably during the 5 years that he's on the front lines. Alan decides that he's not going to let them exploit him, so he tells Granville that he has an idea, which is to take the direct approach and ask the king about this himself. Granville immediately stops him and asks him to let him handle this instead. After all, the royal messenger managed to fool Keel by claiming the Granville set his family up, and he can't just sit and do nothing while they drag his name through the mud like that. Seeing his determination, Alan decides to give in, saying that they won't be going to the front lines for some time yet, so he'll leave it to him. Alan's party got more time to go dungeon crawling over summer break, and eventually, they conquered their third B-rank dungeon. They all received their updated adventurer cards, and most of the adventurers in the guild are shocked to know that they're B-rank, even though they're still students. The receptionist assumes that their party will attempt to clear an A-rank dungeon next, so she warns them that there are very few adventurers who explore the A-rank dungeons. This is due to the overly formidable boss monsters on the last floor, and since they may contain traps of an unknown nature, she recommends they review the available documentation carefully. She also mentions that for suitable gear, she recommends they participate in the auctions held by the Adventurers Guild. They can earn good money by putting their own item drops up for auction, or they can participate in the bidding to obtain rare items instead. Alan doesn't even let her finish and excitedly asks her if there are any MP recovery rings, but she apologizes and clarifies that they don't have any of those, as far as she knows. She's heard of HP recovery or poison resistance rings showing up on rare occasions though. Alan figured it wouldn't be that easy, but he still thinks these auctions sound like an event with a lot of potential. Dagora asks him what the plan is, wanting to know if they're going to tackle an A-rank dungeon soon. Alan immediately confirms it, saying that it's down to business as soon as they review the details and get the right equipment. Once they get that done, the party dives into the A-rank dungeon, but they don't move from the first floor and spend a few nights camping there. Alan sent Hawkins scouting all night while they slept, but there's still no sign of the finish line, which let him know that A-rank dungeons are way too big. They even lost count of how many days they spent on this floor alone, and Dagora already wants to go home. Alan asks Maria if any monsters attacked them, and she informs him that a few did, but she killed them all. After this, the party decides to move forward, and they soon find 2 orc kings and 1 cyclops. Dagora and Krina decide to charge at them head-on, so Alan sees that B-rank monsters don't spook them anymore. Krina uses her slash skill, while Dagora uses full might, and she manages to take down one of the orc kings in no time. Cecil then casts Flame Lance to charge against the cyclops to keep it at bay, and Dagora continues fighting the remaining orc king, saying that he's almost done. However, as soon as the orc king falls defeated, the cyclops attacks him from behind, pushing him away. Cecil runs to help him without thinking, but just when Dagora falls, one of the tiles under him activates a trap. Both Cecil and Dagora suddenly disappear along with Fran, so Alan assumes they fell into a teleport trap, which means they got sent to a different part of the dungeon. They have no time to lose now, so he asks Krina to take out the Cyclops, while he creates as many Maria cards as he can. After summoning them, he asks them to take many Fronds of Life and Seeds of Magic items with them, then go find Cecil and Dagora. Krina uses her skill to take out the Cyclops in no time, and she immediately says that they must go save them. Alan tells her that they won't find them by rushing around recklessly, and clarifies that he already has his summons searching for them, so they just have to wait for now. Meanwhile, Dagora and Cecil are somewhere in the dungeon, surrounded by high-level monsters. Dagora does his best to defend Cecil, using his skill against them as she casts flame lances from a distance. However, her magic can only do so much against them, and Dagora is already exhausted, so he can't keep up for much longer. One of the monsters sends him flying with a punch, so Dagora uses Frond of Life to heal himself. Not even that is enough to heal him completely though, and that was the last healing item he had. Cecil doesn't have any left either, and they're completely cornered now, so the situation couldn't be worse. When all the monsters charge at them at once, Maria finally finds them, so she immediately uses Poltergeist to clear the entire floor in a matter of seconds. Once the monsters are gone, she gives Dagora and Cecil a Frond of Life so they can recover. Alan uses the share skill to see them, and informs the others that he found them. Maria tells Cecil and Dagora that help will be here soon, so they have to stay here for now. Unfortunately, in no time, 2 huge boars appear on the floor, so Cecil says that they have no choice but to beat these monsters and hold out here. Alan quickens the pace and asks Fran to use Fleetfoot, making them advance much faster than before so they can get to them in time. Cecil and Dagora fight the huge boars with Maria's help, while Alan tries to find them through the complex maze, hoping that they don't die on him. However, to their bad luck, when Cecil and Dagora manage to take out the huge boars, an even more dangerous monster appears. Before things get even worse, Alan gets there just in time along with the others, and summons Peon to use his Paralyzed Needle ability on the monster. As soon as the monster is paralyzed, Dagora doesn't hesitate and finishes it with his Mithril Axe in a second. Both he and Cecil are relieved that Alan got there in time, and Keel quickly uses his magic to heal them. Alan tells them that they have to think about how to counter those traps, so maybe they should recruit a scout for the party after all. Dagora tells him that doing that means going back to C-rank dungeons all over again, so he's not sure that's the best choice. Cecil mentions that they could move in a tighter formation from now on, though Krina just thinks they must power through them with grit, which takes them by surprise. In no time, they finally reach the final floor of the A-rank dungeon, and for the first time, they see an A-rank monster in person. Alan can tell that it's huge, at least 10 meters tall, so Dagora wonders if their attacks will even reach it. Despite this, Alan reassures everyone and tells them that they're lucky the first one they encountered is an armored type, because if they can beat a high defense monster like that, it means their attacks will work on any A-rank. Besides, they're all at a pretty high level now, so they must be more confident. Alan still thinks that it sucks how they all keep getting further ahead of him in level though, so he decides to switch up his cards. After doing this, he simply asks them to stick to the plan and says that he'll make the first move because it's time for his special attack. Without wasting any time, he summons several copies of Wally above the monsters, and just when they fall right on them, he hits them with their maximum firepower, making them explode. Just with this, he manages to defeat the 10 orc kings surrounding the A-rank boss, easily earning 200,000 experience points. Alan laughs with satisfaction and mentions that this is basically the same as him casting magic, though Cecil is not happy that he stole the name of her spell. He warns everyone that the boss is still standing, so Krina and Dagora don't waste any time and immediately run directly towards it. However, as soon as Krina gets near the monster, it instantly crushes her with its fist, making everyone freeze in shock, wondering if she's okay, since even Substitute activated and everything. Fortunately, Krina is tough enough, so she pushes the monster's fist upwards and assures them she's alright. Everyone cheers for her, and Keel quickly heals her so she can keep going, while Dagora approaches the boss's head head, crawling up its arm to land an explosive strike. Krena then follows with a pyroblast, and Cecil casts a flame lance while Alan sends several copies of Maria for an all-out attack. With all of this, the A-rank monster falls in no time, and everyone celebrates when they realize they beat the toughest dungeon there is. By defeating this boss, Alan earns a total of 480,000 experience points, and they get an A-rank magic stone. Keel only focuses on the treasure chest they got, though he notices that it's just a wooden one. Despite this, what they find in the treasure chest is a scarletite axe, much better than the mithril one. Everyone agrees when Alan says that Dagora should keep it because axes are his wheelhouse, and it's time to retire that mithril axe of his. Dagora gladly accepts the new axe, thanking the mithril one for all the good times. Now Alan knows that the front lines are filled with monsters like that boss, which means they're going to need to keep leveling up and get way better equipment. Just then, the system congratulates them and tells them that it's its pleasure to present them with their first certificate of success, which gives them the right to challenge an S-rank dungeon by clearing 5 A-rank ones. Everyone is surprised to hear that S-rank dungeons exist, because that means there are S-rank boss monsters much stronger than the one they just beat. That terrifies them a little, though Keel only says that the treasure chest must be worth a fortune for sure, and that's all he cares about. With that, summer break comes to an end, and Alan is now 13 years old. Some of his classmates thank him and explain that the advice he gave them helped a lot, because they made it through a C-rank dungeon. They mention that there were only 3 students from their class who got expelled for not clearing a dungeon in time, so it wasn't so bad in the end. Everyone's surprised when they find out Alan's party conquered an A-rank dungeon, and they just think that having a sword lord must help for sure, because even the seniors struggle to beat A-rank. Krena enjoys the attention, but she quickly forgets about that and approaches Alan to ask him to spar for old time's sake. Alan declines the offer though, asking her to give him a break and explaining that his summons are off fighting in an A-rank dungeon right now, so he can't change any cards. Before she can complain, Karlova shows up and drags her away, saying that she's sparring with him instead. Krena doesn't like that idea at all, so she desperately asks Alan for help, but he just waves at her and asks her to have fun. Raful then asks him if he'll spar with him in that case, and Alan easily agrees. Sparring with Raful reminds him of all the times he fought against Mihai, so he's really having fun. However, the tip of a sword suddenly flies towards them, almost hitting him, so they soon realize it's a broken piece of Karlova's great sword. Karlova is still sparring with Krena, and after she breaks his sword, he admits that she's strong enough to beat an A-rank dungeon for sure. Krena is clearly out of breath, and her sword is broken too, but she thanks him for the match. Raful just thinks it's amazing she can give their teacher a run for his money, and Alan agrees, feeling glad that she has someone other than him to fight with. After the match, Karlova informs both Krena and Alan that the headmaster wants to see them now. As they walk to the headmaster's office, he asks them if they're going to keep crawling dungeons, so Alan informs him that their goal is to challenge an S rank before they graduate. There are only 4 A-rank dungeons in the city though, so they'll need to challenge one more somewhere else. Karlova mentions that he conquered 3 A-rank dungeons, since that was the best he could manage back then. He clarifies that nobody in the kingdom has made it to an S-rank dungeon ever, since Lord Diverg did several decades ago, so it will go down in history if they manage it. Once they get to the headmaster's office, Krena doesn't hold back and bluntly asks him if he's an elf. The headmaster calmly confirms it and tells her that he's a millennium old, despite how he looks, and he's served as both academy headmaster and city administrator for 43 years now. Both Alan and Krena are shocked to know that he's 1,000 years old, but the headmaster moves on to business and informs them that he'd like them to participate in the school's martial arts tournament that's being held next week. Krena is clearly excited about it, unlike Alan, who says this is the first time he hears about it. Karlova explains that freshmen like them can't normally participate because it's a fighting tournament where 16 contenders vie for the top spot and no magic is allowed. The headmaster mentions that many guests attend from other countries, as well as members of the Raytash royal family. Alan politely tells him that Dagora is a stronger attacker than him, so that should make him a better fit. However, the headmaster explains that axe users are unfortunately not eligible for participation. The use of skills is allowed, so he's recommending him for the slot personally. Alan assumes that he wants him to show off what a summoner can do, but unless this can teach him something new or level up his skills, he considers it a waste of time. That's why he simply declines the offer, which takes Krena by surprise. The headmaster tries to convince him and informs him that winning the tournament earns him the right to fight Sword Lord Diverg. That information only seems to get Krena excited, so Alan tells her that she should upgrade her equipment before then. Knowing that he won't convince him, the headmaster gives up and says that he'll just enroll Krena for the tournament in that case. The day before the martial arts tournament is set to begin, they get 3 visitors at the house: Granvel, Zinoff, and Riefel for some reason. Granvel greets Keel and Nina, saying that he can see some resemblance to Viscount Carnell. He decides to cut to the chase and tell them that he's spoken with the king about the future of the Carnell family, and he has made no promise to restore their family to nobility. That leads him to the reason for his visit, so he places a box on the table and informs them that it's a contract that will restore the Carnell family to good standing. The conditions are that Keel must serve 5 years in the war, but making significant contributions to the war effort may shorten that period. Granville clarifies that's all there is to it, and mentions that the king has already signed the the contract, as well as the Granvelle and Hamilton families. Keel and his sister are both surprised by all of this, though they don't know anything about the Hamilton family. That's when Raffol decides to speak, saying that they've never had a proper chance to talk in class before. He properly introduces himself as Raffol Hamilton, and explains that he's here on behalf of his father, Count Hamilton, who is the liege lord of the Granvelle and Carnell families. They still don't understand very well what that means, so Alan informs them that liege lords are upper nobility who take charge and care for vassal families. Raffol then tells Keel that during his time on the front lines, the Hamiltons will take on the responsibility of caring for his family. That is amazing news for them, so they couldn't be more happy and relieved, but Keel still hesitantly asks Granvelle why he's doing this for them. Granvelle explains that members of nobility must adhere to social contracts and take responsibility for their own actions, so as the Granvelle family, he's merely upholding his duty. However, he clarifies that they have more to discuss, and mentions that there's still the royal messenger who collaborated with the Carnells and the envoy who came to speak with Keel. His investigation determined they both served under a certain member of royalty, the Crown Prince, Invel von Ratash, the king's nephew, and next in line for the throne. There is no direct evidence that links the Crown Prince to this scheme, which means the king can't do anything. The king is reaching old age, so it's likely the Crown Prince will have ascended the throne in the next 5 years, and there is no guarantee he will uphold this contract, so he asks Keel if he will sign it anyway. Keel tells him that they've all helped to give his family a chance that they might not otherwise have, so he won't let them down, and as head of the Carnell family, he will also uphold his duty. Once this is settled, Granvelle mentions that the martial arts tournament is tomorrow, so he looks forward to seeing Krina in action as a sword lord. The next day during the tournament, Granvelle informs Alan that the Crown Prince is sitting on the skybox across from them. As the tournament comes to an end, Krina defeats the last competitor to win, so now she has to face sword lord Dverg. Krina has new equipment now, but Dverg warns her that in his years, he's hunted monsters, vanquished fiends, and slayed demonic gods, so she can come at him with all she has, not holding anything back. Without a doubt, Krina attacks him with an air slash and then immediately approaches him from above with a thunderous blow. However, she soon realizes it's like her attacks didn't even hit him, and Dverg then attacks her with a slash, so she quickly counters with her own. She loses balance after clashing swords, so Dverg uses the opportunity to kick her, sending her flying and asking her if that's all she's got. Krina tries to recover as soon as she can, just now understanding how hard he really hits. Dverg doesn't hold back against her, but Krina refuses to give up and attacks with all her might, landing a hit so powerful it sends a shockwave through the whole arena. However, when the smoke disperses, everyone sees the moment Krina falls defeated after he blocked her attack. Despite how harsh he was, Dverg asks her to grow stronger and tells her that her friends need her. Once Krina is taken to the infirmary, Alan comes in running with the others and uses a frond of life to heal her. The moment she regains her consciousness, Krina can't help but tear up because she poured everything she had into that fight, but she still lost, and she couldn't even land one hit. Alan admits that Dverg had the advantage in both skills and equipment, but he clarifies that it just means she has plenty of untapped potential left. Krina actually feels better after hearing that, and Alan convinces her of getting so tough that she can wipe the floor with him next year. Granvelle is glad to see she's doing better, but his expression changes to terror for a moment when he sees the Crown Prince directly approaching him, clapping his hands and saying that it was a wonderful fight. He invites him to have a chat, and Granvelle knows he can't refuse, so he has no other choice than to go with him, feeling a little cornered. To his surprise, Alan quickly steps in, acting as his manservant and asking him to have a seat. The Crown Prince mentions that he doesn't recall permitting any servants to butt in, but he decides to allow it and just asks Granvelle to sit down. Alan left Cecil and the others with Captain Zenov, so he knows they should be okay, and the real question is what this prince wants with the Viscount. Invel tells Granvelle that business must be booming in his fiefdom, since a sword lord was born among his serfs. He got to restart the mithril mines, and he tore down his biggest rival, the Carnells. And now, there is a contract in place to restore the Carnells to nobility, so he can't believe the king can be so capricious, though he already has a good idea of who put that idea in his head. Invel informs him that the Jamutan Empire is facing a very hostile battlefront in the war and wants them to send them reinforcements, so he's thinking about dispatching his daughter. Alan does his best to remain calm, but Granville easily loses his composure, asking him to wait a moment. Invel simply asks him not to throw a fit and explains that it's only fair Alliance supporters like him uphold the duty that comes with it, because all of them in the Kingdom First camp have been demanding that they invest less of their resources in the war against the Demon Lord. Alan is starting to grasp the political landscape around here after hearing that, and understands that it's split between the Alliance camp who wants to help rally against the Demon Lord and the Kingdom First camp who want to prioritize their own country. Invel tells Granvelle that he understands how he feels, because he has his own little girl who's about to turn 10, and worse yet, she has a talent. That said, he directly asks Granvelle to tell the king that he wants to ditch the contract, and clarifies that if he does, he'll forget about what he mentioned earlier. Alan quickly understands the situation, and confirms that the Crown Prince wants Keel to serve as his daughter's personal healer. Granville hesitantly tells him that it won't be easy to walk back a contract, though Alan can't believe that he's actually going to fold to keep Cecil safe. He decides to intervene, and tells him that this is a golden opportunity to reap the fruits of battle. Invel Granville doesn't even know who he is, so Alan politely introduces himself as the leader of the party that Sword Lord Krena and Cecil belong to. He explains that he was given the mission to protect Cecil from any and all danger. With that, Granville tells the prince that they're aware of the risks, so if he wishes to send his daughter to provide support on the Empire's front lines, then he will happily abide by that order. Granville is just going along with whatever Alan is trying to do though, so he's clearly nervous and tense. Invel admits that he's impressed, so he asks Alan to lay down his life to protect the girl if he really can, and Alan easily accepts. 3 months pass after that, and Alan's enhanced skill goes up to level 7, so he decides to repeat a dungeon with his party and challenge the boss monster spawn. Finally, on their 76th run-through, they face the ultimate boss monster, a heavy dragon, the biggest challenge an A-rank dungeon can throw at them. They all upgraded their weapons and equipped rings that boost their stats, so Alan tells them that they'll use a defensive strategy this time. He summons several copies of Steely to use them as a shield, and decides to strike first, warning the others to watch out for the dragon's breath attack. Alan summons copies of Wally to hit the heavy dragon with a Wally blaster, but to his surprise, this only angers the dragon. What surprises everyone even more is the fact that the dragon can speak, which means it must have really high intelligence. The dragon tells them that their ignorance is sinful, so they have to pay for it by burning alive in his hellish flames. Alan doesn't even let him finish and hits him with another Wally blaster, angering him even more just because he wasn't done talking yet. That attack takes a good part of the dragon's HP, though Cecil is more worried about how mad he is now. Not caring about that, Alan gives the party the signal to attack, so they all approach the dragon from different directions to decrease his HP. The dragon attacks them with his fire breath, completely infuriated, so Alan orders Steely to use substitute and then sacrifice. Only this allows them to survive the attack, but the dragon prepares to hit them with another blast, and this time, Krena assures them that they can tank it. Despite this, Keel notices that the dragon seems kind of slow now, and Alan realizes he's charging up, so he asks everyone to retreat at once and summons more copies of Steely. The dragon is about to hit them with a third blast, and Alan can't summon more copies of Steely fast enough, so he asks Krena and Dagora to hang in there. Keel casts High Heal on them immediately, but the dragon doesn't give them time to recover and attempts to attack again. Alan has figured out exactly how fast and powerful its breath attack is though, so he assures everyone that they can do this and asks them to get ready for a long fight. Before they try anything, they notice a strange glow coming from Krena, and Dagora quickly recognizes what it is. In less than a second, Krena jumps at the dragon, not stopping even after receiving a direct attack. After moving through the flames, she easily cuts off one of its arms, and when Alan sees her blank expression, he realizes she's using her extra skill, Limit Break. He quickly checks her stats and notices that all her stats are boosted by 3,000 and up, and she's even got super HP recovery, which is restoring 1% of her HP every second. Even after receiving another direct hit from the dragon, Krena simply jumps back at it and pierces its core with her sword, creating an explosion. Alan's grimoire informs him that they've defeated a heavy dragon, so he's earned 1,600,000 experience points. With that, Krena finally comes back to her senses and turns around to smile at them, happily saying that she beat the big dragon. In late March, after beating another monster in an A-rank dungeon, Krena realizes that she leveled up again, but she doesn't look happy about it because now she's hit the cap too. Alan never imagined they'd have this problem, since after just a single year at the academy, at age 13, everybody in the party except for him has reached the level cap. This is likely due to the fact the Demon Lord boosted the rank of all monsters on Earth, which resulted in everyone leveling up faster. This is just another example of how the balance of this world is falling apart. Dagora asks him if this means they're stuck now, but Alan clarifies that there are still some things they can do. For starters, everyone needs to learn how to freely use their extra skill, and they'll also need to get stronger weapons and equipment. That makes sense to everyone, but Cecil tells him that it's hard to get motivated if they can't level up by beating monsters anymore. Alan reminds her that it's not set in stone, so there must be some way around the cap. He gives him some thought himself, knowing that he played plenty of online games where it was possible to increase the level cap, which means it's just a matter of figuring out the requirements. They have 2 years until they join the war effort, so he has to make the no-life gamers a force to reckon with by then. Soon, April arrives and spring break comes to an end, so about 2,600 students advance a grade to start their second year. In their first class, Karlova informs them that the class rosters don't change even after they go up a grade, but they will be seeing some new faces in the form of transfer students. Just then, the whole class is surprised to see 2 high elves and a dwarf entering the classroom, and Karlova tells them that these newcomers are from the northeast and northwest continents. The elf girl introduces herself as Sophia Lona from the level kingdom of Rosenheim, but she clarifies that they're free to call her Sophie. The elf guy next to her then introduces himself as Volmar and says that he's Princess Sophia Lone's bodyguard, since she is a high elf who is next in line for the throne. Most students in the class are surprised to hear this, but while they're admiring her, Sophie's gaze gets fixated on Alan, and she stares at him in awe for some reason. Alan notices this right away and assumes that she's staring at him because of his dark hair, so he just glares at her and silently asks her to dare to try to make fun of him for it. Lastly, the dwarf girl cheerfully introduces herself as Maruru, saying that she's from the Bacchus Empire. Now that all 3 of them have introduced themselves, Karlova tells Alan that he's only got 5 members in his party, so he should take charge of the newbies. Sophie seems to love the idea, and it's not like Alan can refuse, so he tells them that they can talk more in detail over lunch. He thinks having 8 members instead of 5 won't affect their experience gain, so it's actually fine by him. During lunch, Alan introduces himself and his party, mentioning that they go dungeon crawling every day, so he wants to know if that will be a problem for them. Sophie tells him that won't be a problem at all, and informs him that her talent is Spirit Mage, and Volmar has the Archer talent. Maruru then mentions that she's got a super rare talent called Talos General, though she admits that her usefulness is kind of limited due to reasons she won't get into. Despite this, she clarifies that she wants to get stronger, because they only have 2 years to get ready to face the worst. With this, Alan realizes that they already know all about the war with the Demon Lord. Krena asks them not to worry, and assures them that they're all about helping each other get tougher. Alan agrees with her, and then welcomes the 3 of them to the No Life Gamers party. Sometime later, Alan is surprised to run into the headmaster in the hallways since he never sees him around here. The headmaster tells him that he just came to check on Princess Sophie alone, which makes him realize Sophie must be an even more esteemed figure than him. The headmaster clarifies that even though they're both high elves, she is a member of the royal family, so she is much more significant than a mere headmaster such as himself. He then tells him that Volmar may be her guard, but he's the leader of the party she's in, so he must keep her safe. Alan knows this already, so he easily accepts, and 4 days later, the new members move into their house. They decide to hold a welcome party for them, and he kindly suggests that they drop the formalities since they're all friends now. Krena doesn't hesitate for a second and immediately digs in, though she's surprised to see that the elves are saying a prayer before eating. Alan notices that they're praying to the sovereign of spirits, so he decides to ask them about it. Sophie informs him that they all worship the deity who gave them spirits magic, Lord Rosen. They offer prayers to Rosen every day so that he can ascend to be the god of spirits. Cecil then asks Maruru if she doesn't pray or anything, and she simply denies it, explaining that Lord de Gragny told them that they don't need to. Alan doesn't know who that is, so she tells him that de Gragny is a deity that dwarves worship as the dungeon master because he controls all the dungeons. She mentions that all the cool magic tools that dwarves make are based on Lord de Gragny's creations. After hearing this, Alan thinks that those cubes at the dungeons that serve as their system must be dwarven technology too. Sophie then asks him what deity he and his friends worship, but Alan can't really think of one. Keel mentions that he worships Lord Elmia, the god of creation, since offering him prayers at the church is how he became able to use healing magic. Dagora changes the topic and says that Sophie, Volmar, and Maruru are going to tackle a B-rank dungeon soon, so he wants to know if they're going with them. Alan denies it and tells him that he wants to finish conquering the A-rank dungeon before summer break, so they'll do that and help the newbies with the B-rank dungeon at the same time. No one really understands how they'll do that, so he explains that they'll just split the party in 2. He and Dagora will join the new members in the B-rank dungeon, and their goal will be to help them level up. Meanwhile, Krena, Cecil, and Keel will focus on conquering their 3rd A-rank dungeon. They're all at max level now, but he'll still dispatch some of his summons as support. The next day, after updating their party registration, they head straight to the dungeon. Both Sophie and Maruru are amazed to see their own stats in Alan's grimoire, since it's the first time they see these numbers. The grimoire displays all of their information, and Dagora can see that Maruru is their age, but he can't believe that Sophie's age is 48 and Volmar's is 67. Sophie laughs nervously and simply asks him not to mind their long-level lifespans. Alan changes the subject and informs them that they'll use summons for scouting and transport. He summons the Maria and Fran squad, which surprises both Sophie and Maruru since they've never seen the power of a summoner. Without wasting more time, they all dive into the B-rank dungeon until they encounter a monster. Maruru immediately charges at it without thinking, but the monster easily pushes her away, so Sophie asks Volmar to do something. Without a second thought, Volmar uses a strongbow to hit the monster right in its head, taking it down with only a single strike. Alan approaches Maruru to see if she's okay after that hit, and even though it's nothing serious, Sophie decides to use her talent as a spirit mage to help her. With an incantation, she invokes the spirit of water, which soon surrounds Maruru and heals her minor wounds. Sophie explains that while it's not as powerful as the spells of clerics or wizards, spirit magic is excellent for providing healing support, so they can count on her to cover their backs. Maruru apologizes for making them worry, saying that she hates being so worthless. She explains that she can make mincemeat out of dragons easy, but she has to have a golem first. Everyone is actually surprised to hear that, and Volmar mentions that golems are the main reason the Baucus Empire has managed to fend off the Demon Lord's invasion this far. Alan can't even blame her for not wanting to bring her ultimate weapon into a foreign country. They decide to take a break after that, and Sophia admits that Alan and Dagora are a formidable force, so it would be reassuring if they served on the same battlefield. Alan agrees and says it's too bad it is the government of each nation that decides where they go. He puts that aside to address a question he's had for some time now, since Sophie has not stopped calling him sir since they met. Sophie apologizes for not explaining before, and tells him it's because he is the person who Lord Rosen spoke of in his prophecy. The Sovereign of Spirits has been in a deep slumber for some time now, but they began to hear him whispering over a decade ago. He spoke of a certain raven-haired youth born on the southern end of the central continent, lieutenant, whose attributes were all ranked very low. Alan simply assumes that he muttered nonsense in his sleep, but Sophie assures him it's a prophecy. She explains that once she laid eyes on him and his summoned creatures, she knew for sure that the prophecy was true. She mentions that Lord Rosen also said that the raven-haired man will tower over those who block the light as they dance in the sky and free this world from the darkness. Even after hearing this, Alan still thinks it's a bunch of nonsense, and he decides to say nothing more about it. In late July, Sophie manages to beat the boss monster of the B-rank dungeon with her extra skill, since she leveled up high enough to pull it off, all thanks to them. She beat that monster on her own, so Dagora admits that skills that only work once a day are really strong. Sophie mentions that Volmar has one too, and Maruru says that it's the same for her, but she only needs a golem. Volmar simply says that he saves his to use only when the princess is in danger, so he won't show them what it is. Time after this, they're able to beat 3 B-rank dungeons and 1 A-rank dungeon before summer break even starts. Meanwhile, Kiel, Krina, and Cecil also manage to beat their 4th A-rank dungeon. The day before summer break starts, Alan and Krina get a summons from the headmaster. He informs them that the school is hosting another martial arts tournament this October, and he'd like them to participate. Just like the last time, Krina immediately accepts and Alan simply declines, explaining that he sees no good reason to put his skills on display. The headmaster asks him if Princess Sophia alone has told him about the sovereign spirits, and Alan confirms it, telling him that he's heard he often mutters nonsense in his sleep. Helmios can't hold his laugh after hearing this, but the headmaster calmly clarifies that they're prophecies. He might play an important role in saving the world from the Demon Lord's invasion, so they wish to learn more about the extent of his summoner powers. Alan tells him that he has even more reason to refuse assuming the prophecy is true, since it will cause the Demon Lord's army to treat him as a serious threat. If he makes a public show of his summoner powers, they could realize he hasn't reached his peak yet and decide to kill him now, so there's simply no benefit to having him participate in the tournament. Just then, Helmios casually drops something on the floor, saying that it's his very important MP recovery ring. Krena is surprised to see the ring, because Alan has been looking for one forever. Helmios picks it back up and says that he has to be careful, because Rosen made this super special ring just for him. He then mentions that MP recovery rings don't drop in dungeons, not even A-rank or S-rank ones, and he heard it from Dedragny himself. Helmios tells him that he may get lucky and find a weapon made of orichalcum in the S-rank dungeon, though he doesn't recommend trying. After all, he would tackle it with his party of 8, and even though they wouldn't all be doomed, a number of his friends will die before he's forced to give up. Krena is clearly worried after hearing this, but Alan remains calm and thanks Helmios for sharing that valuable information. He asks him what point he's trying to make here, and Helmios explains that this tournament is special. The runner-up will get a chance to duel Sword Lord Diverg, while the winner gets to fight none other than him, Helmios the hero. Helmios then mentions that he'll give him the MP recovery ring if he can beat him. Alan decides to take a good look at the ring before anything, and he's excited to see that it recovers 1% of his MP per second. That is good enough of a reason for him to compete, so he tells Helmios that he'll gladly join the tournament. Helmios informs him that he's allowed to use items of his own, so Alan decides that he's going to stock a bunch of healing items. Lastly, Helmios tells him that he's got 2 months and wishes him luck coming up with a winning strategy. Once this is settled, Alan informs his party all about the situation, getting their approval to strike out on his own over summer break. He has to raise his summon level to have any hope of beating Helmios, not to mention obtain a ton of magic stones. With this in mind, Alan travels to each adventurer's guild in the kingdom and gathers as many magic stones as he can. In the meantime, he has the rest of the party tackle their 5th A-rank dungeon, since he still wants to earn the right to challenge an S-rank one. Alan posted quests using his savings of 28,000 gold coins and farmed a bit himself to gather 1 million E-rank and D-rank magic stones, along with 100,000 C-rank ones. And then, he reached summon level 7, which unlocked both a new skill and B-rank summon creatures. By October, Alan turns 14 and finally returns to Academy City, so Cecil informs him that they beat their 5th A-rank dungeon, just like he asked them to. Alan tells them that he beat his yesterday, and Sophie is surprised to know that he beat the A-rank boss monster by himself. He decides to tease Krina a bit and tells her that he's gotten pretty strong, and his goal is to beat Helmios, so first he's going to take her down. Krina tells him that he's welcome to try, because she's been waiting to fight him all summer. In no time, the martial arts tournament begins, and both Alan and Krina fight in the final match. Alan is just a newcomer, while Krina is last year's champion and a sword lord, so the expectations about her are high. Most people know that the two of them have already conquered 5 A-rank dungeons though, which makes it clear that they're both pretty strong. Alan and Krina are really going at it, and even Cecil can see that Alan's swordsmanship is much sharper than it was before. Kiel clarifies that it's the same for Krina, since she's in another league from last year. Even though most of the audience is impressed, Helmios can tell that Alan is still hiding all his aces up his sleeve, which makes him think he probably believes he can win without using any skills. Krina asks him not to hold back on her, and then attacks him with an air slash, taking him by surprise. Alan manages to block that with his sword, but he wasn't expecting her to hit that hard. Krina runs straight towards him and tries to use her extra skill, saying that she's going for the win. Limit break doesn't activate though, which means she can't use her extra skill freely just yet. Despite this, Krina doesn't hold back and continues attacking him and having fun, while Alan is fighting for his life. They still haven't settled that fight from when they were 8, so he's not ready to give up. After Krina uses another slash, she notices that Alan is using his grimoire to summon something, but she doesn't give him any time to try anything and decides to attack him with a pyroblast. To everyone's surprise, this powerful attack hits Alan straight on, making a cut across his torso. This attack is strong enough to kill A-rank monsters, so Krina forgets the fight for a moment and gets worried about him. However, Alan suddenly smiles and corners her before she can react, putting his sword to her neck as he reminds her that she shouldn't let her guard down until the fight ends. Krina is now seething with rage and frustration, but she admits defeat, saying that he's bested her. Everyone's surprised after they announce that the championship goes to Alan the Summoner, because he actually beat a sword lord himself. Krina finally smiles again and congratulates him, asking him how he overcame her pyroblast. Alan apologizes and tells her that he's keeping that a secret for now, but the only thing he can say is that he honed his unique strengths over the past 2 months, and that's how he won. Krina seems satisfied with that answer, but even after the fight, she still looks worried, because Diverg has been at the same level all this time, and getting stuck like that really sucks. Alan agrees with her, but he suddenly headbutts her, asking her to quit fretting over her level, because he promises he's going to solve that problem. She just has to stay focused on her current challenge and climb over the wall in front of her. This actually reassures her enough, so Krina smiles again and faces Diverg in the arena for their special match. Alan gave her some rings that boost agility, so he knows she has a shot at winning if she can get her extra skill to trigger. Diverg doesn't hold back one bit in the match, just like the last time, and he even hits her with an Earth Dragon Blast, not letting her recover. However, receiving this hit actually allows her to activate her extra skill, Limit Break, and Diverg can see her true potential in no time. Thanks to this, Krina moves swiftly and dodges his movements until she takes him down. The moment Diverg hits the ground, everyone thinks that he lost, and even he can't believe it himself. Just when they thought it was over, Diverg stands back up, activating his own extra skill and refusing to give up, saying that he can never lose, not until they're reunited. Krina runs straight towards him, still in the midst of her frenzy, but that's when Diverg suddenly uses his extra skill, Guard Break, against her, taking her by surprise. Right before he lands a mortal hit, Helmios suddenly intervenes himself and blocks it with his sword, asking Diverg to chill out since he could have killed the poor girl. Just then, Diverg finally snaps out of it and comes to his senses, immediately backing away. Helmios tells him that he shouldn't let his skill just take the reins, because he could regret it someday. Diverg is still processing the situation, realizing that he lost control of himself fighting against this little girl. He lets his sword fall onto the ground and falls on his knees, so Krina approaches him to see if he's okay. To her surprise, Diverg admits defeat with a dark expression and tells her that she's bested him. Diverg asks her to accept his apologies and then suddenly gives her his sword, saying that it's hers now. Everyone is surprised by this, and Diverg walks away without another word, leaving Krina really confused. Even the host can't believe what just happened, but he announces that it seems Diverg has admitted defeat, which makes Sword Lord Krina the victor. Everyone cheers for her after this, but even if the victory is hers, Krina still looks very disappointed because she lost to him again, no matter what the others say. Now it's time for Alan's match against the hero, though he's still looking at Krina, so Helmios asks him if he's worried about his friend. To his surprise, Alan simply tells him that he has his thanks for saving Krina's life. He waits for the final match to begin, and hears as the whole crowd cheers only for Helmios, knowing that the hero is a special person in this world. Hundreds of thousands have lost their lives to the Demon Lord's army as Doomsday seems to loom ever closer, but the hero is basically a savior sent by the gods themselves. History speaks for itself, as Helmios first took to the battlefield at age 15, and he's still holding the Demon Lord's army at bay even now at age 24. It's no wonder that people consider him a beacon of hope, but none of that matters to Alan right now because he's about to wipe that smirk on Helmios' face and take that MP recovery ring for himself. Helmios informs him that this tournament will probably make him as famous as he is. Alan doesn't think that's a good thing though, and he warns him that he's not a fan of senseless battles, so he advises him to surrender now, since it'll hurt less in the morning. Helmios obviously doesn't take him seriously, and tells him that he imagines he wasted a lot of time and effort to prepare for this, but he knows for a fact that he can't win. Alan firmly clarifies that effort is never wasted, because it compounds. As soon as the match begins, Helmios disappears in a fraction of a second and attacks him with his sword, but everyone is surprised to see that Alan actually managed to parry that. The only thing they can think is that the hero is holding back, because he's got to make sure not to accidentally kill the kid. Alan is aware that Helmios was faster than he expected, and he knows for sure now that he can't afford to take any hits, because it's crazy how powerful he is without using any skills. Helmios is a little confused after seeing that Alan was able to stop that, so he quickly uses his appraisal skill on him. From what he can see, Alan shouldn't have enough endurance to withstand his attacks, so it doesn't make sense at all. Alan looks at him with a smug expression, refusing to answer any of his questions, and knowing that Helmios can't see his summon buffs with his appraisal skill. Helmios easily forgets about it and simply decides to keep going, attacking Alan repeatedly without giving him a break. After all, he hasn't used any skills, but Alan is already having a hard time, which makes him think he probably gave him too much credit. Alan doesn't do anything yet, and continues blocking his attacks, but some people in the crowd start wondering why he's not doing anything to counter. Some of them even think that Sword Lord Krina would have put up a better fight, since they've seen nothing impressive on his part. Alan silently assesses Helmios, knowing that they're on par in terms of agility, so fighting normally isn't going to work here, and he needs to trip him up. With this in mind, he decides to summon his rank B dragon creature, Drago, and asks him to attack right away. This takes Helmios by surprise, and it's enough to make him lose balance, so Alan takes the opportunity to hit back for the first time in this match. Despite this, seeing a real dragon in the arena out of nowhere makes everyone panic, thinking that monsters are attacking, and even Invil looks alarmed. Helmios remains calm and admits that the hit actually hurt, so he packs a harder punch than he expected. Alan knows that he did some damage, but Helmios' armor blocked most of it, since it's made of orichalcum. Helmios is just glad that he finally gets to see Alan's talent in action, and he now knows that summoners have some awfully large friends. Drago suddenly speaks and warns him that he'll have no mercy for anybody who threatens his master. Alan's friends are surprised to see him going all out, and they know that he's using the hero to test out his new abilities, so he's not sweating this at all. Before everyone panics even further, the host lets them know that the headmaster has informed him this is one of Alan's summoner skills, so the match will continue. Without wasting any time, Alan orders Drago to use his awakened skill, so Helmios sees the moment the dragon attacks him with a hellfire of fury. The fact that Helmios doesn't dodge the attack makes the audience panic, but he suddenly comes out of the flames, elevating himself in the air and using a healing skill to recover in a matter of seconds. Alan had no idea he had such a skill, and he also didn't know he was able to fly. Now he knows 3 of the skills the hero has, and he's aware that normal mode should give him 6 skills total, and one of them has to be an attack type. Helmios uses his appraisal skill once again, and notices that he can't see the stats of his summon creatures, like he can with monsters. He warns Alan that he won't land another hit on him because he can fly faster than dragons. Despite this, Alan smiles and thanks him for putting some distance between them, and he then activates a Wally Blaster, making him explode before he can react. The audience panics again when they see that the hero blew up just like that, though Alan's friends aren't surprised that he used that against the hero. Helmios is still standing even after this, but this time he complains and clarifies that the explosion did hurt. Alan reminds him with a smile that he tried to warn him earlier, so that's what he gets for not listening. Once again, he surrounds Helmios with several copies of Wally in the air for another Wally Blaster, making him explode a second time. The audience starts completely freaking out, saying that somebody has to stop that kid before he kills Helmios. The host asks everyone to keep it together, but he's having a hard time trying to make them calm down. Alan, on the other hand, is just loving this new skill, because it's really powerful after all. Before, it would take up to 10 seconds for him to summon just a single creature, but thanks to the quick summon skill, it's practically instant now. It only requires him to visualize which creature and how many he wants to summon, and he can even swap his entire inventory of 70 cards in the blink of an eye. Of course, he's gotta be conscious of how much it eats his stock of MP and magic stones, but being able to summon so fast that his opponent never notices is huge, so it's pretty overpowered. After exploding with that Wally Blaster, Helmios suddenly comes down from the sky with a direct attack, so Alan quickly dodges him and summons Serbi, asking him to use his awakened skill, Ninefold Crunch. The audience panics when they see another monster appearing in the arena, and it is now a Cerberus. Helmios even admits that this is just like fighting the Demon Lord's army, so he decides to get serious and defeats the Cerberus with his sword. However, he's a little confused to see no blood after making that cut, and while he thinks about it, Alan orders Drago to use Fire Breath, trying to take him by surprise. Helmios reacts just in time and attacks Alan directly, but Alan summons Serbi again and keeps Helmios away with its awakened skill. This actually puts some distance between them, and they both are forced to heal themselves, Helmios with his skill, and Alan with a Frond of Life. Helmios admits that fighting a summoner is interesting, so he's forced him to step it up. That only means he's been holding back all this time, and Helmios gives him some friendly advice before going all out, saying that he should surrender now if he wants to live. After all, this is one attack that he can't cut back on. Completely ignoring his warning, Alan prepares for what's coming, knowing that he's going to use his 6th hero skill, the attack type. Helmios doesn't waste any more time and uses his skill, Phoenix Blade, setting his sword ablaze before charging directly at him. While he approaches him at high speed, Alan sends Serbi and Drago to attack, but Helmios gets rid of them in a matter of seconds. Despite this, Alan uses the quick summon skill to make Mirror appear right in front of him, and he then asks him to use its Reflect ability. The moment Helmios' sword connects with Mirror's shield, the Reflect ability makes the entire force of his attack bounce right back at him, sending him flying away. Alan admits that this was risky in terms of their stats, but Mirror really held fast. Helmios remains on the ground with a smile on his face, recognizing that Alan is incredible, and realizing he was waiting for that opportunity this whole time. Alan asks him if he wants to throw in the towel, and clarifies that he's ready to reflect every attack that he throws at him now. Helmios admits that something like that is scary, and he now knows that the Sovereign of Spirits was right about everything, which is great news because it means hope isn't lost and humanity still has a chance. The war was starting to seem endless, and he was stuck chasing the Demon Lord's shadow. There were no more trials for him to pass or better equipment for him to obtain, and he lost countless comrades, only for new ones to join him as he got sent back to the front lines over and over. He's humanity's hero after all, so he's not allowed to give up, even if the only hope that he has left is entirely superficial. The person who gave him the the MP recovery ring, told him that it'll be important when they both cross paths, and said that this person would renew the hope inside of him. Alan is still completely skeptical about all of that, so Helmios tells him that this is where he teaches him that he's still way out of his league. Alan quickly declines the offer and tells him that he's already had enough of that for a lifetime, and he knows that the hero is pretty powerful. Deep down, he just wants him to hurry and hand over that ring, because that's all he really cares about, and he's wasting magic stones here. Despite this, Helmios insists and tells him it'll be just one more attack, but the aura around him changes just then, letting him know that he's using his extra skill. Even the headmaster is alarmed to see this, because he didn't think the hero would go this far. Alan is just tired of this situation, and he doesn't understand why Helmios and Diverg are such sore losers. That aside, he knows that this is bad, because he's not prepared to take on his extra skill. He immediately summons several copies of Mirror, but even with that, he doesn't know if he stands a chance of surviving. Once his extra skill is ready, Helmios jumps directly at him with a smile, exclaiming that this is the best that humanity has to offer. Without holding back, he attacks Alan with his extra skill, Holy Sword, and the attack is so powerful that it cuts right through Mirror's shield with ease, allowing him to get to him. Alan immediately tries to block that attack himself, but Helmios instantly pulverizes his sword and cuts both his arms off, making him crash into the wall. All of Alan's friends are terrified to see this, but Helmios keeps a cocky attitude and asks him if he's still alive, bragging about his own attack. Alan is certainly still alive, but he's completely seething with rage because Helmios almost killed him, and he won't forgive him for that, so he's going to strip that ring off his corpse. He then uses Peachy's ability, Blessing of Earth, which fully heals his HP and MP and regenerates any lost limbs. Helmios is surprised to see that he got his arms back and assumes that he even has elven healing potions. He thinks that they're done here already, but Alan doesn't waste any time and takes another sword from his inventory. Helmios tells him that he should know better than to punch above his weight, so he should call it quits now. Alan clarifies that he doesn't care if he's stronger than him, because quitting just closes the door to victory. Helmios then asks him what he'll do if the only thing waiting for him beyond that door is despair. Alan doesn't understand that question at first, but he then realizes Helmios has been facing a hopeless cause for most of his life. Even after hitting the level cap, he had to keep fighting as humanity's only hope. Full of conviction, Alan tells him that if despair is what he faces after beating him, then that's just the next thing he'll find a way to beat. This takes Helmios by surprise, though he's not sure anything really comes after overcoming despair. With a serious expression, he decides to ask Alan exactly who he is. Alan is a little surprised by this question, and he mentions that from what he's heard, the Demon Lord likes to call himself Demon Lord of the End, so that would make him Alan, Summoner of the Beginning. He actually just made that up on the fly, but Helmios is completely convinced by that answer, so he immediately takes off the MP ring and gives it to Alan. Seeing how confused Alan is, Helmios explains that the Sovereign of Spirits instructed him to give it to the Summoner of the Beginning. That means the requirement to unlock the MP recovery ring was a simple keyword, and they could have avoided all this fight. Despite this, Alan tells him that he can't really take this ring if he needs it to stay alive, but that's when Helmios reveals that he actually has a matching pair. Alan decides not to comment anything on that, and now that he has the ring, he quickly admits defeat, saying that the powers of the hero were just too much for him to handle. Everyone is surprised to see him surrendering so easily, but Alan simply sees no point in fighting now that he has the ring. Helmios can't help but laugh at this, but it was just to expect that Alan would do something like that. Just like that, Helmios wins the special exhibition match, in a way that nobody was expecting. 1 week later, the award ceremony is held at a hotel, and Alan can tell that the prince looks like he's on pins and needles, now that he knows he can summon deadly monsters like dragons. Invil tells him that his match against the hero was the greatest spectacle in the history of the Academy, and he can't believe Granvelle could keep his extraordinary talent a secret all this time. Alan shows him the gift he received from Granvelle, and explains that he's an honored guest of his family. The guards get alarmed when they see the sword with the emblem, since all weapons should have been confiscated before the ceremony. Alan ignores their panic and explains that he owes Viscount Granvelle a great debt of gratitude from his time as serf. That's why he considers it his duty to protect the Granvelles from any threats, as their ever-faithful bodyguard. Only a few months later, King Ratash passes away, and Crown Prince Invel takes the throne. Alan assumes that he took his threat seriously, seeing as how they've had no trouble yet. In December, Alan's party finally beats a heavy dragon without needing Krina's extra skill. The new B-rank summon creatures have made it much easier for them to beat A-rank dungeons, and even Maruru is about to reach her max level. After beating enough A-rank dungeons, the system upgrades their stamp card into an S-rank dungeon entry pass, so Alan informs everyone that their goal for the new year is beating an S-rank dungeon. Despite this, soon after that, their plans are derailed by unexpected news. In January, the headmaster suddenly informs them that the 5 of them have been ordered to join the war effort by royal decree. This takes them all by surprise, because they're only in their second year. The headmaster clarifies that's not all, and informs Sophie, Volmar, and Maruru that orders came from Rosenheim and the Baucus Empire, so they have to return home immediately. That applies to all the transfer students staying at the academy as well. Alan reads the royal decree and mentions that they're apparently dispatching them to Rosenheim, so he wants to know what's going on. The headmaster explains that the Demon Lord has mobilized 10 million monsters, so it's an invasion force targeting Rosenheim, the Baucis Empire, and them here on the central continent. Historically, the Demon Lord's army has exclusively attacked the central continent, since it's the weakest of them all. Rosenheim is protected by the Sovereign of Spirits, while the Baucis Empire has a stalwart like of golem defenders. However, the arrival of the hero has thrown all of that out of balance. The elves have an army of 1.6 million, which is fewer troops than either neighboring continent, and worse yet, they've dispatched most of their healers to help elsewhere. That's likely why Rosenheim is being targeted now. A month ago, 3 million of the Demon Lord's troops invaded Rosenheim, and they've already captured over half of the elves' territory. Sophie panics as soon as she hears that, and immediately asks him if her mother, the queen, is safe. The headmaster informs her that the capital city of Fortinia fell 3 days ago, so the whereabouts of the queen are still unclear. Sophie's pale instantly pales with the news, and Alan knows that the Demon Lord must have been keeping forces in reserve for years leading up to this. The headmaster mentions that the most recent report said the survivors are preparing for a last stand down south, so the very fate of Rosenheim is now on the line. Alan now understands why they've been ordered to go there, but he wants to know why they're only hearing about this now if the invasion started a month ago. The headmaster explains that elves detest the idea of other races stepping foot into their lands, and that isolationist mindset runs throughout their leadership, so it led to a disastrously late decision. When Maruru asks him what he knows about the Baucis Empire and everywhere else, the headmaster clarifies that the battles on the other fronts haven't begun yet. 2 million monsters stand at the border of the central continent, while 1 million monsters are camped outside the Baucis Empire. Alan can't help but wonder what they're waiting for, and asks him what the healer elves stationed on the central continent are doing. The headmaster tells him that they got new orders and are making their way back to Rosenheim as they speak. With that, Alan easily understands that the monsters on the central continent are waiting for the healers to leave. That means their army will have to stave off 2 million monsters with no healers, which is nearly impossible. Despite this, the headmaster tells them that the hero will help to make up for it. Cecil mentions that they have over 50 manned fortresses along the front lines, so there's no way the hero can protect all of them. Alan then tells the headmaster that he said the Demon Lord has an army of 10 million, but he's only counting 6 million from what he's said so far. The headmaster clarifies that the remaining 4 million that they assume to be reserves have been spotted off the coast of the central continent. This information makes everyone uncertain of what to do, because they don't know if they should go to the Giamaton Empire instead. After all, if that falls, the Ratash Kingdom will be next, and most people don't even know about the Demon Lord. They all ask Alan what to do, and to their surprise, he tells them there's only one option: to work together to save Rosenheim. Alan explains that the Demon Lord has waited for years to amass 10 million troops, but even so, it's not enough to conquer Rosenheim, the Baucis Empire, and the central continent at the same time. That's why he started by putting pressure on Rosenheim with an army of 3 million, because his goal is to make all the elven healers leave the central continent. Then, after Rosenheim falls, the other troops will attack the now weakened central continent, until finally, they launch an all-out assault on the Baucis Empire. Cecil admits that would explain what the 4 million reserve troops are for, but Alan clarifies that there's one more thing. After Rosenheim was invaded, they unilaterally decided to pull their elves out of the central continent, and he assumes that violates the terms of the Five-Continent Alliance. Creating discord among the allied nations and breaking down their established lines of support is exactly what the Demon Lord wants, so they can't play into his hand. Be it the elves, the humans, or the dwarves, no race can fend off the Demon Lord alone, so saving Rosenheim is the key to everything, and it's the best way to protect everyone, including their kingdom. Despite this, Keel tells him that the fact remains that the central continent is faced with 2 million monsters and no elven healers. They could save Rosenheim, but not if it comes at the cost of losing the Giamaton Empire. Alan informs him that he'll supply fronds of life to their troops, and explains that one of these can heal every soldier in an area the size of the Academy's training grounds by 1,000 HP. The headmaster is really shocked by this information, because that could heal almost 3,000 troops in most common tactical formations. Alan tells him that he has 600,000 of these, and he knows it's not a surefire strategy, but it should take a lot of the pressure off the troops defending the central continent. The headmaster recognizes this, and when he asks him if this frond of life comes from his summoner talent, Alan lies and tells him it is a new type of elven recovery elixir made in Rosenheim. This confuses Dagora and the others because they're pretty sure it actually comes from his talent, but Sophie plays along and says that he's telling the truth and that it is indeed a new elven creation. She explains that to make up for withdrawing their healers, Rosenheim is going to supply these recovery elixirs to the central continent. Alan is glad that she understood right away, and he tells the headmaster that this should alleviate any concern about the alliance falling apart. That way, they can save Rosenheim, shore up the central continent's defense, and keep the alliance in place. The headmaster admits that pulling this off successfully will bring the Demon Lord's entire plan crumbling down, so it's truly a genius plan. Alan clarifies that there's no guarantee that everything will go smoothly, so they must be prepared to adapt on the fly. He mentions that he'll also give Maruru 10,000 of the elven recovery elixirs for the dwarves, and some of his seed of magic elixir too, since it can recover MP. Maruru is a Talos general who can control golems with magic, so there's a good chance that she'll end up on the front lines after all. She's very surprised by his offer at first, but she gladly accepts it and thanks him, saying that she'll put them to good use. Alan warns her that this doesn't change their plan to visit the Bacchus Empire in April, because they're going to give the Demon Lord's army a quick thrashing so that the no-life gamers can get back to dungeon crawling. Maruru easily agrees and tells them that she'll be waiting for them in the Bacchus Empire. That night, Keel tells his family that he's made sure they'll all be safe, and Rifle of the Hamilton family will take care of them while he's gone, so they don't have to worry. Nina is clearly worried about him anyway, so he reminds her that once he proves himself on the battlefield, they can go back to being nobles. Despite this, Nina starts crying and tells him that it won't matter if he loses his life, so she just asks him to be safe. Meanwhile, Cecil decides to send a letter home, just like her brother used to do, because she remembers well the diaries he left behind and wants to be prepared for the worst. Alan feels a little guilty after hearing this, so he apologizes to all of them, saying that he's pretty sure the reason that the 5 of them were drafted into the war is because of a grudge the king has against him. He really feels like it's all his fault, but Dagora asks him to save his apologies and reminds him that he accepted that they were destined for war a long time ago. Keel clarifies that it's the same for him, and Cecil tells him that he's the one who talked big about them defeating the Demon Lord, so they just have to do their best. Alan thanks them for their reassurance, and the next day, he gives instructions to his summons. He talks to one of his newest summons, Ellie, a B-rank spirit type, who understands that her job is to gather intel on the Demon Lord's invasion force and then murderize the lot of them. Alan then asks Drago to do his best to support the humans without letting them catch sight of him, though he knows it won't be easy. Once they go, Alan meets with the rest to board a high-speed magic ship and finally leave Academy City after 2 whole years, hoping that they can prevent the other students from seeing the horror of the war. On the way, Krena and Cecil ask Sophie what Rosenheim is like, wanting to know if it'll be a problem if they notice that they're human. Sophie tells them that she thinks it would be best if everyone wore hoods while they're in town. After all, Rosenheim is the capital city of the elves that's full of natural beauty, including a huge tree known as the World Tree. Elves can be somewhat snobbish when it comes to other races, but they are a peaceful people who hate war and love the spiritual. Sophie informs them that right now they're heading for Nest, which is normally a tranquil port town, but it's become an emergency refuge for those fleeing the Demon Lord's invasion. Alan admits that it's frustrating that they don't know much about what's happening over there, so he hopes they make it before the worst happens. 4 days later, they finally reach the city of Nest, which looks like it's still standing, fortunately. That means the invasion hasn't reached here yet, and Alan knows that they need to gather intel fast and find a way to help the elves on the front lines. Upon landing, everyone wears their hoods, except Sophie and Volmar, who are greeted by 2 guards. They inform Sophie that they're here to escort her because the Council of Elders awaits her arrival. Everyone gets on the cart, but the ride quickly becomes unpleasant when they see the amount of injured people who fled the war on the streets. They clearly don't have enough healers, so most of them are really suffering with their wounds. Alan summons Hollow to use the share skill and take a look at the city, noticing that there are upwards of 1 million refugees, not counting any soldiers. Krena can't stand to see them like that, so she tells Alan that these people need help, so they should use the elixir on them. Alan tells her that they could, but he reminds her that time is of essence right now, so he wants to meet with the elders first. With that in mind, Dagora says that they should split into 2 groups, and Alan quickly agrees, saying that he'll use his summoned creatures to let them know when the meeting is over. Without wasting any time, Dagora, Krena, Cecil, and Keel quickly leave to help the injured people, and Alan stays with Sophie and Volmar to meet the Council of Elders. When Sophie announces her arrival, the elders are relieved to see her, and she immediately asks them about her mother. One of the elders apologizes and explains that they tried to convince her to evacuate with them, but she's currently stuck in Tiano, where they continue to hold the line. Sophie gets her hopes up, thinking that her mother is still alive, but the elder informs her that contact has been completely cut off, so Tiamo could fall as early as tomorrow, and Nest will soon suffer the same fate. Despite this, Alan clarifies that they still have time to stop the worst from happening. His presence surprises the whole council, because they weren't expecting a human to be there. However, they soon realize he has raven hair, and Sophie confirms that he is the savior who Lord Rosen spoke of, and he came with her from the kingdom of Ratash to save Rosenheim from disaster. With this in mind, one of the elders, Lukdral, who is missing an arm, asks Alan to join them for the war council. As soon as he sees him, Alan asks him to let him treat his arm first, though the elder tells him that there's no need, because he's already had it bandaged. Despite this, Sophie asks him to do as he's told, and Alan then uses Peachy's blessing of heaven to heal Lukdral, helping him recover his lost limbs. Lukdral is shocked to see that his arm is back in a matter of seconds, and the rest of the elders assume that Alan used an elven elixir, which is exactly what he wanted them to think. Alan cuts to the chase and asks them how many wounded soldiers they have here, so Lukdral informs him there are roughly 100,000. With that information, Alan tells them that this elven elixir can fully recover both the HP and MP of all the people within an area the size of the town square. He mentions that his friends are currently tending to the injured as they speak, but they need more hands. Alan informs them that he'll provide them with 1,000 of these, so he wants them to use them to treat the injured. Luke Dral finds this hard to believe, because there's no way he has 1,000 elven elixirs, and it's strange enough that they've never heard of such a powerful thing. Sophie interrupts him to assure him it is truly an elven elixir, so she wants him to follow Alan's lead on this. Having no other choice, Luke Dral follows her orders, and Alan tells them that they have no time to waste right now, so his group will immediately head for Tiamo. One of the elders warns him that it takes a whole month to reach Tiamo by carriage, no matter how fast the horse, but Alan tells him that distance won't pose a problem. He also mentions that he has more questions he'd like to ask them, so he'll leave a proxy here to handle those. Without another word, Alan summons Ellie and Papo, which kind of startles some of the elders. Luke Dral assumes that they're spirits, but Ellie informs him that they're actually summoned creatures brought forth by Alan's amazing talent. Alan lets them know that the bird has the ability to transmit his voice, so they'll be able to communicate that way. Once that's settled, Sophie orders the elders to take care of things here and tells them that she will journey forth with Alan. As soon as they exit the building, a lot of elven citizens approach Sophie, asking her to flee because they think that Rosenheim is done for. Sophie asks them not to lose hope and reminds them that they must never give up. However, her people explain that they're defenseless now and they have no homes, weapons, or even food left. A woman tells her that her husband and children were eaten by monsters right in front of her, so she has nothing left, not even a glimmer of hope. Sophie can hear the anguish in her voice, but she tries her best to keep her composure as the princess and tells them that no matter how bad things get, she has a duty not to give up on Rosenheim and its citizens. As soon as they meet with the rest of the group, Alan summons Griff and they immediately depart for Tiamo. Before leaving, Sophie lets her people know that she has returned to save Rosenheim from the invasion, so they must have faith and offer their prayers to the sovereign of spirits. With this, Luke Dral realizes that they still have some fight left in them, so he quickly gives the order to heal their wounded troops as soon as possible because they have to regroup and rally the army. Meanwhile, Alan asks everyone to hold on tight because they're going top speed now. He activates Griff's awakened skill, Jet, which allows them to fly faster than ever before. As soon as Tiamo comes into view, they notice there is fire, so Alan summons Hollow and activates its awakened skill, White Knight. After using the share skill, he's able to see that the city is surrounded by monsters, but it hasn't been breached yet, and it seems like the Demon Lord's army is taking a break. He mentions that even though it's taken some damage, the city is still standing, so they can definitely save it. Sophie is relieved to hear this, so as soon as they land, she asks the guards to take her to the queen. In no time, she finally reunites with her mother, happy to see that she's alive and well. During this warm reunion, Alan notices that there's an animal riding on the queen's shoulder, so he assumes elves are really attuned with wildlife. The queen tells Sophie that she heard from Nest of her return, but she didn't think she'd get here so fast. Sophie tells her that it's all thanks to Alan, and then introduces her to the no-life gamers, saying that he is their leader. When the queen and her guards see Alan, they quickly assume he's the boy who Lord Rosen prophesied, though it's hard to believe they're just a bunch of kids. The queen tells Alan that she heard of his thrilling battle against Helmios the hero, so they would love to have his assistance. Despite this, one of her subordinates tells her that Tiamo won't survive the assault come morning, so she should use this opportunity to flee with the princess back to Nest. The queen immediately refuses to do this, and reminds him that there are still 700,000 refugees who are stranded in this city, so they must forget about her and focus their efforts on finding a way to survive the assault. The guards clearly consider this a tall order, so Alan decides to intervene, asking them how many troops they have left here, wounded or otherwise. One of the guards informs him that there are about 60,000 left who can still fight and 140,000 who are wounded. With that information, Alan tells them that he can provide them with 1,000 of elven elixirs, so he wants them to use them to heal as many of their troops as possible. The guards are a little hesitant at first because they don't think they can heal them with some strange elixir that they've never seen before. Alan doesn't explain anything and clarifies that there's no time for debate now, so they must cooperate with his group so they can fend off the Demon Lord's invasion. The guards still can't believe that they intend to fight against that huge horde, so Alan clarifies that's what they came here for, so they're going to attack the monsters now, under the cover of night. He explains that they'll throw them into disarray by killing as many as they can and buy time for them to heal their troops. Sophie tells Volmar that she wants him to stay here and conduct the treatment of the wounded. Alan then says that he'll leave Ellie behind as well, and after summoning her, he asks her to keep him updated on the situation here. Once he gives them 1,000 Blessing of Heaven elixirs, he wastes no time and leaves with his group, saying that he has about 2,000 still stocked. Krina asks him if they're attacking the monsters by themselves, and Alan confirms it, saying that the plan is just to go wild on them. As they head to the front lines, Alan mentions that he used Hollow to take a quick look, and there are 300,000 monsters surrounding the city. He clarifies that their target is their main force of 130,000 that's posted on the north side, though the number surprises Dagora a little. After landing, Alan summons several copies of Drago and Serbi to explain the plan. He tells the Drago squad that they must use their fire breath to hit the monsters far and wide. Meanwhile, the Serbi squad must focus on the A-rank monsters, using their awakened skill to defeat them instantly. Alan then summons Philae, Finny, and Genbu, asking them to use their abilities and awakened skills to buff their team. Once this is done, Alan asks Keel and Sophie to to do their part, so they waste no time and use their talents. Keel casts a magic shield, and Sophie summons the spirits of nature, asking them to bless them with their protection. As soon as they do that, Alan informs everyone that he and Cecil will attack them from the air, so the rest of them can charge in once the fighting starts. The group wastes no time and jumps into action, and Alan knows that it's been a month since the Demon Lord's army of 3 million attacked Rosenheim, so he estimates about 3 million elves must have lost their lives. Monsters need nourishment and rest just like any living creature, which means they've been using elves as their food source while invading. With that in mind, Alan knows that they deserve no mercy, and it's time to make them regret it. Once they're ready, Cecil uses her extra skill, Petit Meteor, creating a huge crater on the ground where thousands of monsters were. Even Alan is a little intimidated by that attack, and mentions that it's the total opposite of Petit, considering it probably wiped out 10,000 of monsters on the spot. Cecil is really glad that it worked, though she doesn't like the fact that she can only use it once a day. After this attack, Drago and Serby follow Alan's orders, as planned, and Dagora and the others run to the battlefield to fight. Even though everything is going smoothly, Alan soon finds out that the monsters have healers, so he tells Cecil that they have to take them out. He decides to attack them with a Wally Blaster, while Cecil opens fire with a Stone Bullet spell, taking out several healers. A gargoyle suddenly approaches them in the air, so Alan quickly hits it with a Wally and makes it explode. Despite this, thanks to Hollow, he soon finds out that the troops posted at the North Gate are already making a move, so they can't let them catch Krina's group in a pincer. He summons Papo and activates his awakened skill, Messenger, to alert everyone and let them know that there are 30,000 more monsters coming their way, so they must fly into the sky to regroup. Once they do this, Alan uses the share skill to get information from Ellie and informs them that the healing in Tiamo is coming along, but they're going to need more time. The plan is to zip over to the south side and attack the 50,000 monsters posted there, so they must be ready to defeat some more of them. Of course, the group easily agrees with the plan, so they waste no time and decide to jump into action, ready to keep fighting. The next day, the Queen is surprised to know that they defeated over 40,000 monsters in just a single night. She's really glad to hear that, and mentions that they also had success using the Elven Elixir to make their troops fighting fit again. Alan tells her that the Demon Lord's troops are in disarray now, so they shouldn't attack for the time being. The Queen thanks them all for their service, and informs them that rooms and food have been prepared for them so they can rest. Before they leave, one of the guards says that it's great that Tiamo is safe, but there are 3 other cities on the verge of collapse. That clearly takes them by surprise, so he explains that after the capital of Fortenia fell, they made a strategic retreat and hid the Queen here in Tiamo. The Demon Lord's army quickly split up to hunt her down and assure their victory, and that's how they were able to keep them at bay until they arrived. However, the other 3 cities are doomed to fall at this rate. As soon as they hear that, Alan tells them that he and his party will rush to their aid, so he wants to humbly request for 3 of their generals to accompany them. The guards ask him if he's sure about that, and the Queen warns him that he'll be fighting practically non-stop, and she doesn't even know how they can repay him. Despite her warning, Alan decides to go either way, but by the end of the day, he and his party end up completely exhausted. Out of them all, Alan is the one who ended up more drained, because he posted a squadron of his summoned creatures in all 3 cities, and provided each with 500 elven elixirs for the wounded. Now they have a firm grasp of the situation on every front, and there are 300,000 elven troops altogether that should soon be fighting fit. The bad news is he ran out of Blessing of Heaven elixirs to hand out, and had to use 2,500 B-rank magic stones to make more. The elves find that very incredible, and it makes them think that they still have a chance. However, this only buys them a few extra days of survival because it doesn't change the fact that Tiamo is surrounded by 260,000 monsters, and even if they consider how many the elves already defeated, there are still upwards of 2.8 million monsters occupying Rosenheim. Regardless, the Queen tells Alan that he has saved countless lives by holding off the Demon Lord's invasion, so he deserves some kind of reward. She clarifies that he's welcome to anything, and even tells him that he can take her daughter as his wife if he wishes. This takes everyone by surprise, but Sophie is not against the idea at all, and she even seems excited about it. However, Alan simply tells her that's not what he meant. And just then, the room goes completely silent, which makes him wonder if he triggered some kind of event. He's too tired to follow whatever the Queen was saying though, so he just ignores that and tells her that there are 2 things he'd like to request. The first thing is magic stones, because he would like to gather as many as possible. The Queen easily accepts his request and asks Grand Marshal Segul how many magic stones they keep here. Marshal informs her that they've used almost all of their stock to power the magic ships, but Alan clarifies that he's only talking about harvesting them from the monsters they've defeated. The Queen tells him that he has every right to those, so Alan moves on to his second request and asks her to please let him meet with the Sovereign of Spirits. All the elves, including the Queen herself, are surprised that he wants to meet Lord Rosen, so Alan asks them if that's a problem. Sophie intervenes and tells him that they should have introduced him earlier, but the only problem is that the Sovereign of Spirits is usually not awake for conversation. Alan doesn't understand what she means at first, but that's when Lord Rosen suddenly speaks, calling him the Summoner of the Beginning. He doesn't know where the voice is coming from until he realizes that it's the flying squirrel that's been asleep on the queen's shoulder all this time. Alan's party is shocked to know that this little fella is a god, but despite how surprised he is, Alan addresses him with respect and thanks him for the MP recovery ring. He then explains that his party is currently helping the elves to fight off the demon lord's invasion, and he has a wish he'd like him to grant them after they succeed in saving Rosenheim. Rosen easily understands that he wants to be compensated for saving the kingdom, so he asks him what exactly is his wish. Alan tells him that he would like for him to switch all his friends over to hell mode. This takes them all by surprise, and even Rosen is having a hard time trying to understand what he means by that, so Alan clarifies that he's talking about the rule that makes clearing a trial of the gods 100 times harder. With that explanation, Rosen quickly understands that he means the intensity of the trials that are bestowed upon each person. Alan explains that his friends have already reached their maximum potential, and hell mode has no such maximum, so he wants to switch them so they can get stronger. Rosen understands his logic, so he decides to check on that. But after a few seconds, he informs him that Elmia rejected the request and said that nobody's mode can be changed. Alan asks him if it's not even possible to change it to extra mode, which is 10 times harder, but Rosen tells him that Elmia won't listen to a minor deity like him. With that, Alan understands that not all deities command the same level of respect, so he instead asks him if it's possible for him to upgrade his friends to a higher class, such as turning a swordsman into a sword lord. Rosen isn't surprised that he's asking something like that, and he admits that he's starting to see why Elmia agonized over him so much. Alan doesn't know what he's talking about, so Rosen informs him that Elmia said he was on the verge of becoming demon lord, so he panicked and made an even better summoner class. It was supposed to be 6 stars, but he messed up and made it 8 instead. Alan understands just then that the 8-star ranking for summoner was just a blunder by the developers, which means he really got lucky. He asks Rosen if they have a deal, or if it's something that he can only do for elves and not humans. Alan already knows Rosen fiddles with the talents some people are born with, under the guise of a spiritual blessing, because there's no other way elves wind up with so many healers. Rosen admits that he knows how to hit his sore spots, but he clarifies that he won't accept without something in exchange, and he means something beyond saving Rosenheim, like trading part of their lifespan. Something like that sounds too extreme to Krina and the others, but Alan thinks that he can make that work, so he tells him that he can offer all the experience they earned to max out. Rosen is completely shocked by that offer, and asks him if that's really okay, because it means going back to level 1. Alan knows that this is the obvious answer, because lifespan basically equates to time and effort spent. With that in mind, he tells him that he's really okay with it, if that's what it takes to upgrade their class. Unable to argue anymore, Rosen tells him that he got himself a deal, but he clarifies that they can only upgrade 1 rank higher, so 4 stars is the max, and he won't do it for any party members not physically present. Alan accepts the terms, though he silently complains, because he was planning to have Maruru upgrade too. Rosen informs him that he can read minds, and he's not at all impressed by his intentions, so Alan quickly apologizes. Putting that aside, Alan tells him that this deal doesn't benefit him personally, and since Rosen can read his mind, he knows that he's thinking about his little sister, who doesn't have a talent. Having no choice, Rosen tells him that he'll bestow her a 1-star class, which Alan easily accepts and thanks him for it. With that settled, Alan assures him that they'll put their very best effort into saving Rosenheim, so Rosen decides to take another nap. Right after that, Alan clarifies that he can't stay awake much longer either, so he excuses himself and leaves. The elves are still surprised by that whole interaction, because they've never seen Lord Rosen speak with anyone that much before, and it sounded like Lord Elmia was part of the conversation too. They have no idea what they were talking about at all, but it's clear to them that Alan is special, so they know it'll be better to start being conscious of it. The next day, Cecil and the others abruptly wake Alan up to question him, because he fell asleep right away without telling them anything about what happened, and they want him to start explaining. Alan realizes just then that he was born into this world as a serf at the bottom of the social ladder, and given his lack of standing, it was risky to say anything about being from another word. After all, he could easily end up unfairly ostracized or persecuted for it, so he never even told his parents. However, he fails to understand how that still makes sense now, and it makes him see that there's no reason for him to keep it secret anymore. With that in mind, Alan decides to simply reveal that he's originally from another world. Everyone is shocked by that, so he explains that Lord Elmia took his soul or whatever and brought him here to be reborn as Alan. He used the memories of his past life when he was talking with Lord Rosen yesterday, which is why nobody understood what they were saying. Cecil wonders if he lost his mind or something, but everything slowly begins to make sense as she remembers all of Alan's exploits until now. She realizes that actually explains a lot, and Sophie thinks that this settles it beyond a doubt, so she's now sure that Lord Elmia must have brought Alan here specifically to be the savior of their world. Alan clarifies that he never heard anything like that, and all he was told was to go have fun. Krena admits that it makes sense because he finds a way to make everything fun, no matter what he does. Keel is just kind of relieved that he didn't choose to be the demon lord instead, since the idea alone is terrifying. Cecil gets a little curious, so she decides to ask him how old he was when he was in his home world, but Alan doesn't even try to hide it and tells her that he was 35. This really surprises everyone, because that makes him even older than his dad. Sophie doesn't doesn't look that surprised and tells him that this means they're the same age because he's 49 overall. Alan is slightly surprised by that, but he quickly moves on and clarifies that he's telling them this because they're friends who he trusts and not even his parents know, so he hopes they can keep this a secret. Once they accept, Alan tells them that they're really lucky because they just have to defeat the Demon Lord's army to upgrade, and Dagora has enough room to move 3 classes higher. Cecil asks him what he's talking about because Lord Rosen said he would only upgrade their class 1 rank higher. Alan clarifies that he never said they couldn't do it more than once, so they'll just make him upgrade them again after they hit the max level until everybody has a 4-star class. Keel can't believe that Alan is out here swindling a literal god, and Dagora is still kind of lost, so he doesn't know if this is legit. Cecil doesn't see why not, and she actually can't wait to become an archwizardess next, so she doesn't mind at all. Sophie also likes the idea because it means she can eventually become Rosenheim's second spirit user. With that settled, Alan asks them to make themselves ready for war because they're going to defeat the Demon Lord's army and complete the class upgrade quest. Sometime later, Rosenheim's army manages to defeat a dragon, all thanks to the blessing of heaven elixirs Alan provided them, which helped them recover from the dragon's breath. They even feel stronger now, so Alan knows that the buffs from his summons are working wonders on the elven army. Krina tells him that they should join the fight, so Alan gives it some thought because there are only 37 more creatures left he can summon. With that in mind, he decides to summon an army of Ansi and activates their awakened skill, Spawn. Ansi can produce 100 more of itself that all have half of its stats, so they can form an instant army of 3,000. Keel casts support spells for them, so Alan knows that they won't die in one hit except from something ridiculous like the hero's extra skill. As soon as they're ready, Alan orders them to charge at the Demon Lord's army and to show them what insect power looks like. Soon enough, all the monsters are surrounded by Alan's ants, and he then orders them to spray them with formic acid. Once they do this, the monsters have less endurance and resistance to attacks, which is just what Alan wanted. He's finished distributing his Blessing of Heaven elixir, and today's battle will use up the last of his B-rank magic stones, so they have to be sure to collect the magic stones of all the monsters they defeat. The best approach is to wipe them out, so he orders his ants and other summons to encircle the enemy and not let any escape. Meanwhile, Krena activates her extra skill, Limit Break, to fight against the Demon Lord's army. Cecil wastes no time and casts a spiral cyclone, while Volmar takes several monsters down with his bow alone, and Dagora hits them with explosive strike. Sophie then summons the Great Elemental, a fire spirit called Ifrit that burns a great part of the Demon Lord's army to ash. The elves see this and know that it's one of the princess's grand spirits, which encourages to try harder, to show her that they know how to pull their weight. Thanks to all of this, the battle is going smoothly, and Alan notices that there are no S-rank monsters to worry about, so their forces can hold their own. He thinks Ansi really stole the spotlight out there, so he'll use that spawn skill again tomorrow for sure. With a month of lead time, just one Ansi alone can create an army of 3,000 after all. The elves soon realize that the monsters are fleeing to the north, so they assume they're leaving to join up with their main force. That only means that victory is theirs this time, which they almost can't believe, since it's really like a miracle. At the end of the day, the elven army successfully defended all 4 cities, but it came at the cost of 3,000 soldiers who perished in battle. Once it's all over, Keel notices an elf mourning his daughter, who died during battle. Without saying a word, he decides to use his extra skill, Grace Energy, which brings her back to life and makes the elf cry in happiness and relief. This extra skill can revive one deceased target, but it can't revive those who have been dead for too long, so he's really glad that it actually worked. Alan admits that's a really amazing skill, but Keel clarifies that it can only save one life at best. Even so, Alan comforts him and tells him that's more than enough. That night, they report the results of today's battle to the Queen, letting her know that they defeated 100,000 of the Demon Lord's monsters. Their biggest victory was at the South Gate, where all 70,000 invaders were put down. Even though everything is going smoothly, now that the south side is clear, an elf called Gadaluga asks the Queen to evacuate to Nest. The Queen rejects the idea and tells him that her answer remains the same, and when he tries to insist, Volmar interrupts him and asks him not to give the Queen a hard time. Alan is surprised that Volmar actually spoke up for once, so Sophie explains that those two are related. Gadaluga is known as the strongest man in Rosenheim, and he's the only spirit user in the kingdom, so he serves as the Queen's personal bodyguard. After hearing this, Cecil mentions that he's like the equivalent of the Sword Lord Ratash. Since he's the Queen's bodyguard, Alan easily understands why he didn't go out to join the fighting, because the enemy will know where the Queen is if they catch sight of him. He really thinks that's a shame, because he wants to see what his spirits can do. One of the guards continues with the report, and says that 70,000 magic stones belong to the no-life gamers for their efforts, and they're currently working on gathering the remaining 30,000 from monsters. They can now resume transporting troops and supplies via magic ship, so they'll start by bringing the soldiers in Nest back here to the front lines, which should help bolster their defenses. The Queen asks Alan if he has any more of those elven elixirs, so he tells her that he's currently preparing a new batch. He heard that they used about 400 of them throughout the day, so moving forward, he asks that they pay for any new batches with magic stones. Alan informs them that it will cost 500 100 B-rank stones for 100 elixirs, which kind of takes them by surprise. Dagora can't believe that he's asking something like that after he gave away so many for free, but Keel doesn't see anything wrong with it. Since it's simple supply and demand, the elves accept the deal, so Alan mentions that he has new intel on the Demon Lord's army from his summoned creatures to share. Based on what he can see, all the monsters are preparing to withdraw from the elven cities and move north. Alan informs them that the no-life gamers will pursue the Demon Lord's army and uncover what their plan is while they further whittle down their numbers, so they have to relocate their soldiers from Nest here as quickly as possible. Once the situation has stabilized, he wants them to join them in moving northward because their next objective is to retake the capital city of Fortinia. The queen is surprised by that statement, and she understands that he intends to take the fight to them instead of holding the line. Alan confirms it and explains that his end goal is to wipe out all 2.5 million monsters left in the Demon Lord's army. The next day, they chased after the retreating monsters, lured 30,000 of them away, then defeated them to harvest their magic stones. By repeating this process, they could feasibly wipe out an army of 3 million within 100 days. 3 days after they left Tiamo, they see a fortress not too far north from where they are, so Alan assumes that's where they plan to take cover. However, when he uses his share skill, he realizes he was wrong and that they have something else in mind. Volmar can see it as well, and he knows that this is beyond what they can handle themselves. Because of this, they decide to go back to town right away, and Alan informs the queen that 1 million monsters are about to march on Tiamo. He explains that after retreating from the 4 cities, the Demon Lord's army linked up with their northern reinforcements, and now they're coming to attack Tiamo, so they have about 2 days before they arrive. He assumes they figured the queen was here based on the fighting over the past few days, but they were able to regroup and change direction faster than he expected. Marshall mentions that they might have a tighter chain of command than any of them imagined, and 1 million is just too much. The situation is critical, but Alan tells them that they were bound to need a fortress to fight against their largest numbers, so Tiamo will have to do, and this is where they make their stand. With that in mind, Alan asks them to rally their troops, because they can't do this without the elven army.